Over more than 2 years of development, I learned the Unity game engine from scratch, and I made my very first commercial game, Couch Combat. And in this video, I'm going to go behind the scenes and showcase the entire development. Over the period of the game's development, I logged my work on the game and all these videos, and so using them, I have put together this video. And in it, you can see the game gradually come to life, and you can also see all the issues I faced and problems I had to solve. Also, if you like this sort of long-form game development content, then I also have a video covering the first 100 days of development on my new game, so you can also watch that if you like. But that's all, it's time to go back to April 23, 2020 when I released my very first devlog. Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of my brand new devlog series. This is the second devlog series that I've started and a brand new project that I'm working on. A few months ago, I was looking around for some split-screen games to play on my laptop. Now, laptops works quite well with split-screen games. You can just plug them into TVs, connect some controllers, and you basically have a game console. So I decided that split-screen FPS would be fun. But I couldn't find any at all. The Halo Master Chief Collection on PC took the split-screen out for no apparent reason. And the only split-screen FPSs I could find on PC were ones like Screen Peek, which is probably fun, but I was looking for a more traditional game, where you could actually see the other players. A week or so later, I was still pretty angry that I couldn't find any split-screen games, but at least there are games like Stick Fight. But later on, I had an idea. I was looking for a new game to make, and I figured I could make a split-screen FPS. It would be built like Stick Fight, with the game consisting of quick and goofy rounds in which you start with no weapon on a small stage with 3 other people, and you quickly run to get a weapon and try to be the last one standing. I realized that this is basically the perfect project for me, because I tend to plan huge projects and then abandon them halfway through. But with this game, I would have to build the basic structure of the game, and menus and stuff, and then the rest of the work on the game would just be creating content like guns, stages, and game modes. This meant that if I grew bored of the game, I could just finish up what I was working on and publish the game right there. Now, I hope I'm explaining this well, but the main thing I'm trying to say is that I'm starting a new devlog. It's using Unity instead of GameMaker Studio. It's 3D, and it's an FPS shooter similar to Stick Fight the game. I then used a tutorial to make the basic physics-based FPS movement system, so I just copied down what the tutorial said to do. Then I went back and changed some values, and then I went into the code to read and added to the comments just to get a bit of an understanding of what's actually going on. I got a basic pistol model off of Poly by Google and imported it. Where is it? Oh. But for some reason the model looks very different from what it looks like on Poly. Whatever, that doesn't really matter right now, it's a placeholder model anyway. Then I got it to move the player and then rotate with the player. Spicy. Okay, so making it shoot is a bit difficult, but with the help of a 5-year-old tutorial, I got it working. Sort of. But here's it actually working. I then went on to Sketchfab and downloaded a new pistol model and imported it. This one actually worked correctly, and now looks pretty decent. So I have the basics of shooting down the game, but it doesn't look good or complete. First off, I just created an animation with the Unity animator. I went through quite a few iterations, and the final animation will probably be done in Blender or something, but here's a basic kickback animation. Then I went ahead and created a muzzle flash using Unity as part of the system. I coded it into the script, then I went through a tutorial on how to make the particles. I'm not completely happy with the colors, but I will continue to fiddle with them until they turn out epic enough for my massive standards. I then added some sound. It isn't final, but I think it's pretty nice. Finally, I added some delay in between shots. Now it's a bit more realistic. Sure. The final and most complicated part of this is adding ammo and reloading. First off, I just implemented a basic ammo value. This value starts at 12, and every time you shoot, it is reduced by 1, which it reaches 0, you can't shoot anymore, and the guy will play the empty clicking sound effect. Now I have to do the reloading part of this. I started off by making a reloading animation, and by that I mean I did the Danny method and just spun the gun around. Now it's time to make the second player. Or, well, it's sort of time. I need to get a controller input before anything else. Okay, let's get controller input then. I'm sure it's easy and straightforward. Okay, so, I finally got controller input working. I had to transition all the scripts from the old input system to the new one because I said so. And so it took forever, and I got this beautiful blob of code, but input is finally done. Yay, we can get on to the fun part. So technically there is combat in the game. You can shoot at each other, but the combat doesn't really work because you don't die. Game ended when you were shot. Also, I need UI and respawning and scoring in a basic stage. The first thing I did was slowly fumble my way to getting some basic UI. I made an ammo display, but it took around 2 hours because I couldn't figure out a bug. It turns out that I just assigned the player's body instead of the ground to the script that finds the ammo amount. Whoops. I then took a 3D model of a bullet off of Sketchfab because I have no idea how to 3D model. I stuck that model onto the bullet and added a trail renderer that renders a pretty yellow trail. Finally, I switched out the old crosshair box for a nice new one. Then I made the gun script assign a tag to a bullet whenever it shoots it so that it tells which player shot it. Then I added a value named health to each player. When the bullet collides with the player destroys the bullet and also subtracts from health. At first, I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. Then I realized the bullet was going straight through the other player without registering anything because it was moving too quickly. So I needed to fix that, and the way I fixed that, at least temporarily, changing the collision detection in the rigid body to continuous dynamic instead of just dynamic. Then I stuck it all in a box so it just looks a little bit better. And I also set the font to Roboto, because that's really just better Arial. Well, now that you can get hurt whenever you get shot, the logical next step is literally dying. So I made a bool called dead. Whenever HP is lower than or equal to 0, dead is set to true, and now whenever you're dead, you can't control your body. Disabled. Freezing rotation on the rigid body, so that if you die while running, you can flip around and stuff. So after a bit of playtesting, I realized that it is really hard to hit the other player. You move quickly and the bullets move too slowly. Plus, you can take up to 10 bullets. So I sped up the bullets, increased the bullet's damage, and slowed down the player quite a bit. The guns need to be able to be picked up and dropped by the player. It's a very important part of this game. At the beginning of each round, you start out with nothing, and it's a mad dash to grab the first gun. But I have no idea how to do this. It literally took me nearly a week of accomplishing basically nothing to actually get this to work. It seems so simple, almost a throwaway line, like, then I made it so you can pick up and drop weapons. But this is by far the hardest and most confusing part of the game I've had to work on so far. Finally, I decided to focus and get it done. And the way I did that? Yeah, it was as simple as that. So the first thing I had to do was fix the shooting, because I managed to completely screw it up while trying to add weapon dropping. Okay, so it's looking quite nice now. Now I just have to add the gun to a prefab without completely breaking the game. And I'm already further than I got in all of previous attempts. Next I have to make it so I can remove that gun without the game breaking. And I removed the gun, and the only real dependency on that gun was the ammo UI. And I just set itself to say empty whenever there is no weapon. Now I need to add a weapon pickup to the game. If you raycast out and hit it from the center of your screen, and also hit right click, then it'll add a prefab of the pistol onto your character. First off, I made a basic object that'll act as the pickup. It's just a pistol model with a rigid body and a mesh collider. Then I stuck a new weapon pickup script on the player's camera. The weapon pickup script sends out a raycast when right click is pressed, and if that raycast hits an object on the pickups layer, then it shows a debug log message. So now I added a prefab to be added to the player's character whenever the raycast hits the pickup instead of just sending out a debug message. This works by calling the raycasted pickup and finding a variable on a new script I made that's on the pickup that basically just holds the prefab to be used for the gun. They're fixing a few issues with the gun and it actually works. And I took a quick break to set up Visual Studio Code instead of Visual Studio. It's much nicer. The next few days were spent ironing out the billions of bugs that turning the weapon into a prefab caused, but now it's time for the final step, adding gun dropping. I made it so that whenever you hit F on the keyboard or B on the controller, the gun object will create a pickup and then destroy itself. I tried to get it to fling the pickup away, but I kept making a bunch of bugs so I didn't implement it this devlog. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of my new devlog. I'm making a split screen FPS in Unity, and I've actually decided on a name now for said game, Couch Combat. I'm calling it this because the game is a couch co-op multiplayer game. Or, well, sorta, you're fighting each other, but still. But anyway, this week I'm looking to try and begin making something new. I've never done 3D modeling before. But if I'm making a 3D game and don't want it to look like an asset clip, I need to learn the basics. So this episode, I'm going to be focusing mostly on modeling, rigging, and animating the player's pistol and body. Okay, let's begin. The first thing I'm doing in this devlog is learning the basics of Pro Builder, and making some simple stages to play in. Pro Builder is Unity's official modeling program and also very useful as a stage builder. While it isn't the best for making actual models like players and guns, it's still great for building stages or prototyping things quickly. I'm also using ProGrids with it, which adds a very useful grid system to Unity that makes building levels much easier. I made a very simple stage with some stairs and a door, and quickly realized that the players are a lot bigger than I originally thought. So I started working on making a stage that was better suited to the absolute units that are the player characters. Also, one thing I did to add on to last time was I added a spear collider to the pistol pickup and made it a trigger. Now it's much easier to pick up the pistol because you don't have to click directly on the actual pistol itself, just nearby it. So making a level of Pro Builder is great and all, but I kinda want to get into real modeling with a real epic gamer program like Blender. If you don't know what Blender is, it's a free to use 3D modeling program which you can make animations. But anyway, I just watched some basic interface and stuff tutorials before starting off my 3D modeling journey by making a basic pistol model. I'm just following a very basic Blender tutorial on how to make a pistol model. It's linked in the description as a very good beginner's tutorial. So yeah, now I have this very basic and okay model now. I'm not completely happy with it and it needs to be painted, rigged, and animated, but I'm gonna move on now. So the next thing I want to do is try to model the player. So once again, I picked up a nice beginner's tutorial online and got to work. This one was quite a bit more difficult, but after a pretty long time, I came up with this guy, and he's looking pretty epic if I do say so myself. Though I accidentally got this spear thing over here attached to the torso object, and I can't figure out how to remove it. I'll probably have to redo the torso part in order to fix them, but I haven't convinced myself to do that yet. The models look okay, but now I want to come back and texture paint them, and then rig, animate, and stick them in the game. So the first thing I'm doing is touching up the player model, and then rigging it and trying to slap some Mixamo animations on it. I first off just changed a few small details and then gave it actual hands. I finally realized why I couldn't get rid of that spear. I was actually deleting the spear whenever I tried to delete it earlier, but there were about 5 of them in the exact same place. So after deleting it over and over again, I finally removed them from the object. So what is Mixamo in the first place? Mixamo is a service created by Adobe that has plenty of free animations you can stick in a variety of pre-made characters or even import your own models. I'm gonna import my own. One cool thing about Mixamo is that it automatically rigs your character for you. So I'm gonna try to use that tool to get a rig of my character. If it doesn't work, then I'll just rig it myself. So I set up the auto rigger and got this. I'm not sure if this is what it's gonna look like, or maybe it just looks weird in Mixamo. So I'll try exporting it to Unity. And I exported it to Unity, and surprisingly, it actually looks pretty good. Not sure why it looks so weird in Mixamo, but whatever. Now, the hands are all messed up, but other than that, it looks pretty nice. I'm surprised that Mixamo is working so well, but I decided to make my own animations in Blender instead of using Mixamo's pre-made ones. I'm doing this for the same reason that I decided to make my own models in the first place. I want to learn how to do it. So rigging the player is great and all, but I want to make guns. So let's make my pistol model just a little bit less bad. It was a good first model, but it needs some work, so I'm going to start over and make it better this time. I made a brand new pistol model and added some cool details and stuff to it. Then I added a 4-color material to it and mapped it, and it actually looks really nice and pretty unique now. Then I animated a new shooting animation for it. The way I'm going to animate the player in game is through 2 different objects. One will be the player minus the arms, the other will be the arms and guns. I'm doing it this way because it seems like it has the highest possibility of not being a huge pain to deal with. So basically what I'm getting at is I need to accomplish these tasks before the end of the week. I need to get the running animations in, which don't have any arms. I then need to add arms and the shooting animation to the gun. Then I need to put that all in the game and try to get it all working by the end of the week. Okay, so the very first thing I did was remove the player's arms. It was a tragedy, but a necessary one. The next few hours are going to be spent making a walk cycle for the player in Blender. It looks fairly wonky right now, but it technically has all the stuff that needs to be a good walking animation. But right now it just isn't good, so I need to fix that. Now the walk cycle looks nicer. It's not great, but it'll do for now. Now it's time to import it into Unity and get it looking okay in game. But the first thing I did was take the arms from the player model and stick them on a pistol shooting animation. I then added them to the animation and moved them a bit to make it look right. Okay, and now it's time to import it into Unity and replace the old gun model with it. And they look strange. There are numerous problems with the gun, and the player is constantly running, but other than that, it's working out well. Hello and welcome to the latest in a series of poor decisions. Welcome to my latest devlog episode. This video I'll be polishing up some unfinished things from last devlog, then making some 3D models, and finally making the first few stages for my game. So I know that the animations and models that I've already created don't really work in game yet. but I have tried to work on them and didn't really get anywhere, so I'm just gonna try having some fun and make the second gun in the game, the Uzi. The Uzi is a machine pistol. It'll be the second gun in the game and the first automatic one. I'll have to add a spread system to the game as well. I'm modeling the Uzi off of Sombra's machine pistol from Overwatch. It's a really fun to use gun. It's basically the perfect Uzi, in my opinion. So I just based the Uzi off this image I found online. I made a basic outline and then added details to it. I then tried to add different materials to it. I first tried blue, but wasn't really happy with how it looked. Then I tried this tan, and still didn't really quite like it, but I finally settled on just black and gray. It looks a bit more bland, but overall fits the idea of the Uzi more. Currently, the player is just always walking, and that must be tiring, so I'm going to give the player a break by making an animation controller. The animation controller will simply contain the running and idle states for now, but I'm planning on adding sprinting, sliding, jumping, and punching states eventually. I tried a couple of times to get the player animation controller to work, and for some reason it wasn't functioning. So I did the thing I always do when something isn't working. I gave up. And then came back around the next day. But then I removed all the failed attempts and tried again. Finally, I got a working animation controller that makes the player either walk or idle. First off, I just went into Blender and tried to properly set up the animations so I can use them in Unity better. Then I gave the player hands. I remade the shooting animation with hands this time. Then I created a new idle animation that just gradually moves up and down. Finally, I started work on an actual reload animation. Well, it's not too impressive. After a full day of work on animation, this is what I have from the start. So I just spent around another 2 hours long animating it, and now I have all the pistol animations I could ever want. That is, until I inevitably redo every single one of them. As you can see, I even added a nice little pickup animation, which should make picking up the guns a lot better feeling. Now that I have animations, I need to use them. So I imported the new model into Unity. I resized it and got it ready for animation. Then I just made a new animation controller, but currently the arms and guns are animated in 2 separate animation actions for some reason. I put the animations on the same animation controller and put them on different layers, with one of them on a layer weight of 1. And now the animations finally work properly. I also sped up the reload and pickup animations in Unity. It isn't perfect, and it didn't really work for the shooting animations, but I don't really feel like importing all the stuff again, so I'll just stick with this for now. At this point, I've spent around half my life just trying to get these shooting animations done and imported into the game. So I'm glad that I'm finally moving on to something else. The next part of this devlog will just be dedicated to talking about my process of trying to develop a graphical style for my game. Yeah, I know, level design is coming eventually. First thing I did was make a bunch of models. The first area of the game is going to be a forest area, with trees and rocks and stuff. So I started making some 3D models. I made trees, and rocks, and grass, bushes, and some flowers. Then I imported these models and started putting them together in the game. I got a nice new skybox off the asset store and adjusted the post-processing settings a bit. Some of the inspirations for this game's planned aesthetic are Beat Saber and stick fights. I like the Beat Saber aesthetic of floating in a void, and might try to do that instead of the cloud thing I'm doing right now for the skybox, but I left it there for the rest of this devlog. And the stick fight inspiration is basically just the dark platforms with the colorful tops. But I think this will look a whole lot better on a less flat and empty map. I don't know much about level design to begin with, so I've been watching videos and reading guides and stuff over how it's done well. And these are the basics I've decided on for Couch Combat's style of level design. Yes, there are styles. The first hurdle I had to make it over for this game is fairness. The levels have to be somewhat fair for all 4 players, or if they're just 2, and though the game isn't really intended for 3 players, it should be sorta fair for 3. So how do I make a map fair? Well, the most obvious way is to make the levels fully symmetric for all the players, but this is somewhat boring and limiting. But with some smart level design, I can hopefully use this way to make the majority of the levels. The other way is giving different spawns pros and cons. Like if one spawn has the higher ground and the other has lower, then I can give the lower down one more guns and a bit more cover to make up for the invaluable advantage that is the high ground. Just ask Anakin. Finally, an easy way to fix this issue is just spawning all the players at the 4 corners of a large circle or something. The main part of the map will be in the center with all the loot and stuff, but the further edges are a bit more sparse. So people all run to the center. And also, if they can't think of anything else to do, then I can just spawn the players right next to each other and let them fight it out that way. Okay, so that was a lot of talk and not much level design, so let's get to actually making levels. I'm creating a workflow for making levels as I go along, so it's kind of messy right now, but basically, I start off by just sketching out a basic design of the level. Here it is. The basic design is just a bunch of different level platforms. It's a very basic level. I then put all the platforms in and stuck a bit of green on top of them. Then I added trees and made the whole thing a bit wider. Next, I added bushes, rocks, and other details, and finally, I copy and pasted the same piece of grass about 500,000 times. So I'm making another. And this one, all the players just start off on floating blocks, and then they have to jump down into a big ravine. So I just sketched out the idea, and then I blocked it out. Okay, and here's the finished block out. Then I added materials and the green top to the blocks. Then I added trees, bushes, and flowers. Finally, I added all the grass things again, and here's the final version of this map. It's a lot more creative than the other one, but we'll probably need a lot more playtesting to make it work well for players. So I actually finally got source control set up with GitHub. If you don't know, source control is basically a way for me to back up a project as well as possibly collaborate and revert it to older versions if needed. Really super useful and a good safeguard to have on any project. But the final thing I did was add a basic stage transition that just happens a few seconds after one player dies. Then I attempted to add a simple sprinting mechanic, but it just increased the distance you can jump for some reason instead of the speed you run at. Well, whatever, I'll add sprinting later, if at all. The first thing I'm tackling for this devlog is melee attacks. When you have no weapons equipped, you have fists. And you can punch enemies with them, and while it does somewhat low damage, it can knock them back, so it's possible to either put a bit more space in between yourself and an attacker, or maybe even knock them off the stage entirely. I also want to let you melee with weapons as well. First off, I need to make some melee animations. You might have noticed in the last devlog that in some of the pistol animations, the right arm looks weird. That's because the rig for the arms is messed up, and I created it automatically using Mix-a Mode, and it kinda didn't work too well. So I re-rigged the arms and created a punching animation. I then exported the new arms and made a new weapon prefab for just the fists. I spent basically the first week just trying to import the arm animations and get them looking good. It took way longer than expected. And it's little things like this that end up eating most of my time working on this game. It's kinda surprising, but I mean, I would have never guessed that positioning the arms correctly would take double the time that modeling, rigging, and animating them would take, but whatever. Finally, added an animation controller to it so you can actually punch, and added some screen shake to the punching. I tried to get it to render over other objects, but Unity recently complicated the process of rendering like guns above everything else. It used to be pretty easy, but now it's much more difficult. Anyway, I need to make the punch do damage and knock back players, so let's figure out how to do that. On the last devlog, there was a comment that caught my eye. PezFlow mentioned adding items to the game, like a sticky grenade or a throwable cover that of course is a couch. I really like the idea of items, but to keep it simple, I think I'll add throwables. It'll add a bit of variety to combat, and I'll make sure to keep them mostly couch related. Like the sticky grenade could be a static electricity charged cushion. Though I didn't end up having time to implement throwables this week, I just wanted to mention that I was thinking about them. Any cool or awful ideas you have for throwables are welcome in the comment section. The game only has 2 stages, so it's time to make a few more. I first just drew up concepts for 2 new ones. One is a bunch of islands covered by logs, and the other one is just one big island with a bunch of cover and trees and stuff. Got to work blocking out the first 3 stages. The islands with logs connecting them. For some reason while I was recording this, the player's animation controller went missing. I have no idea why, but I fixed it later. There are longer rotations you can take on these logs, but there are also risky and quicker rotations you can take by hopping on these extra little islands. I like the level, but it needs some cover. But so far the stage is going smoothly. The next day I picked up where I left off and completed the stage. The final stage has some trees, grass, and a new log model for the logs connecting the islands. And of course I got a cool new video of the camera circling around the finished stage. Though I was planning on making the second stage, I actually didn't end up having enough time to do it. So. I'm experimenting with something, and I'm trying to make the stages bigger and messing around with the player movement to make it harder to fall off the stages, and also just making it more fun to move around. The first thing I did was up the counter movement for the player, and now you should stop a lot faster, which keeps you from sliding off cliffs as often. Then I came around and made the sliding a bit more fun by making it faster. Finally, I expanded the first stage greatly, and now there's a lot more empty space to move around in. I need to do that to the other stages as well, but I didn't do it in this devlog because of course I didn't. I need to make it so each gun only has a limited amount of ammo in it. This includes making the pickup store the ammo of the gun whenever it's dropped. I first off spent a while reworking the way ammo is stored, but now each gun has a max amount of ammo that is subtracted from when you reload. Once that amount reaches 0, the gun can no longer shoot. That was pretty easy, but storing the amount of ammo in the pickup was a bit more difficult. I kept encountering issues and bugs with how I was adding the values to the pickup. I figured it out eventually. I then changed the culling mask, which hides certain things from certain players but shows it to the others, like their fists. Now, instead of hiding things on a certain layer from cameras, some cameras can only see certain things. I know it sounds about the same, but this will make the game work with 4 players because some things will need to be hidden from multiple cameras at once, instead of just one. Just a few things left on my to-do list for these few weeks, and one of them is making a score tracker. This will be useful because, duh. The thing about the score tracker is that it'll have to just be an object that travels between multiple scenes, which isn't too hard to do. I just need to be careful not to accidentally create a new object every scene. The scoring object determines how many players exist, and then when that allied player count drops to 1, it gives a point to the last living player and then moves to the next stage. The final thing I did this devlog was just fix up the particle effects for the muzzle flash. It was messed up in devlog 2, and I never quite fixed it until now. Though I really need to make the pistol feel better to shoot, right now it's too slow and needs some new sound. In this devlog, I'm going to be creating a brand new weapon. I will also be redoing the first pistol's animations to make them as spicy as the new weapons. So let's get into it. So let's get started with some absolute throwing. Right now whenever you throw guns, it's just dropping on the ground. Okay, so now the gun is just absolutely flung away from you whenever you throw it, which is pretty good. There's still no animation, but I feel like animation will make the whole action clunkier, and it wouldn't be worth the time. Plus, I've spent so much time animating crap lately, and I know this entire devlog is about animating, so I'm just trying to keep extra animations to a minimum. At the end of the last devlog, I added a scoring system, but the score isn't actually displayed in the game, so I decided some quick UI to show it. And the UI and stuff will definitely get an overhaul soon, but for now it's okay. It actually gets messed up later on in the devlog, so you can see that. This also marks the last task I had planned for 0.2 on the Trello board. So I think it's time I finally got a few input related things sorted, namely a new input script, which will help me finally get 4 players implemented in the future. The process for this is mostly just setting up references to other scripts, and then activating function on those other scripts from the input script. Like whenever a button is pressed, the input script detects it and then activates a function on the movement scripts which tells it to move. And after an hour of hard, strenuous work, here it is, and the game's the exact same. Well, that's actually a good thing, because the purpose of this is to make the code cleaner and better, and though it isn't visually noticeable, it'll be very useful in adding 4 players in just a bit. So now it's time to make some gun animations. I've already created some Uzi animations, but they are pretty bad, so I'm just gonna start over and make them better this time. One thing I didn't realize was that you could pair the gun to the player's hand. So I did that, and now the animations look much better than the original pistol ones. And it's much quicker to do. I studied some other animations a bit more for this new Uzi animation. The reload is heavily based on the Spectre SMG from Valorant, and the shooting animation is inspired by Sombra's machine pistol. And overall, I think these animations are so much better than the pistols, and I cannot wait to get them in-game and stick some sound effects on them. So I imported the model into Unity and put it into the pistol weapon prefab, and set up a new animation controller that works with the Uzi. Now we get a basic idea of what the animations look like in-game. After some cleanup, it looks a lot better, but there are still a ton of issues. You can see his hands, the arms are the wrong material. There's a bit of the Uzi missing for some reason. The animation seems to be slightly off sync, which makes the pickup animation look especially bad. Oh yeah, and the thing still has the behavior of a pistol, but it's still a nice starting point. Anyway, there are just a few differences between a Uzi and a pistol. At least in my game, there's probably quite a few more in real life, but whatever. This game is completely unrealistic. The Uzi is automatic and has a spread, so I need to update my gun script to allow for automatic firing and bullet spread. The bullet spread will also be useful for things like shotguns. Making the gun automatic took a bit of research. I couldn't figure out how to do that with the new input system. Apparently there's a continuous button somewhere under the action settings, but I couldn't find it, so instead I'm using an on-pressed and on-release method. Adding spread was more of the same, some research, some failed attempts, and then I got spread working. One thing I realized was that the bullets don't get destroyed on hitting walls, which is very stupid, so I made the bullets get destroyed approximately 4 devlogs too late. And then I got distracted by trying to fix the issue with the tree collider. I made a new mesh in Blender and everything, but it was translated wrong in Unity for some reason, and there's no way to move a mesh collider. Now I'm going to replace the old pistol animations with some nice new ones. This is basically the exact same process as remaking the Uzi animation was. I took the arms rig, stuck the pistol model in, parented the pistols to the hand, and then animated the idle, shooting, reload, and pickup animations. It's a very simple process, just also very time consuming. Though I like the Uzi animations a bit more, these have a bit more character. These pistol animations are a huge step up from the old ones. Importing them into Unity just took a bit more time, and I switched out the old animation controller for the new 3-layer one I made for the Uzi. And now the game feels so much better to play. But the shooting animation still doesn't really work. It's an issue with the script because it happens in bulk animations, so I need to try and fix that. The issue was before animation was directly tied to shooting. Like, the shoot delay was what controlled whenever it could animate, which just didn't really work, so now animation and shooting are done separately. But both of the guns still feel kinda empty. I wonder why. Oh yeah, it's because they sound like garbage. And now that I'm recording this devlog, I'm realizing you can't hear them. So you didn't know they sound like garbage, but take my word for it. So as per usual, let's get to fixing that. For now, I'm just redoing the shooting and reloading sounds for the pistol and the Uzi. The process of making these sounds was first of all finding a good free-to-use gun sound online, which is near impossible. Then downloading it, increasing the bass in Audacity, and these new sounds sound so much better. Though I'm not completely happy with the firing sounds, I really like the reload ones. The pickup animation sound is still missing, as well as like 50 other things, but that's fine, I'll do it in the future. Though particle effects are the main focus of this devlog, they aren't the only thing I'm working on. The main thing I'm focusing on right now is game feel. I'm just trying to make sure the core gameplay of my game is solid before I continue moving forward. Essentially, I'll be working on some things like balance, making the gunplay feel solid, and getting the movement and stage design to coexist peacefully. And I'm also going to take a few more steps to get closer to the ultimate goal of releasing a demo somewhat soon. In the last devlog, I added some new sounds and animations to the guns, but they still feel kind of empty, so I'm gonna add a lot of juice. Juice is just another way to say game feel, like making something feel satisfying. Juice is a way to give your player positive feedback for doing something, like hitting the enemy. So for now I'm just gonna add a hit marker and a hit marker sound effect for hitting the other player. I started off by making the sound effect. I navigated to a website called Free Sound, and just looked up ding sound. Yes, that's what I searched, ding. I spent a few minutes listening to various dinging noises. No. No. Nope. Before eventually finding the one I liked. Then I imported it into Unity and messed around a few effects to make it sound better. Finally, I put it into Unity and made the bullet column method on the shooting script that plays the sound. I'm not the biggest fan of the sound itself, but it'll work for now. Adding the hit marker was also pretty simple. I added a canvas element that is hidden most of the time, but appears for just a few frames whenever you hit an enemy. A cool thing I've noticed in other FPS games is the gun kinda sways around a bit. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna be following this very slow, but still pretty good tutorial that I'll be linking in the description. And here it is. I also made the guns into prefab variants, so I can edit like a base gun, and that'll add things like weapon sway to all the guns without me having to go into all the different prefabs separately. This will be useful for whenever I have tons of guns and want to just change one simple thing about all of them. So it is time to begin my particle training. I started off by watching Brecky's all-around tutorial on Unity's particle system, and now I think I have a bit more experience and can hopefully make some decent particles. I'm gonna now redo the muzzle flash effect. It's kinda strange looking back that this muzzle flash particle effect, which was very simple, is actually the most difficult to make out of any of the particles. And now it's time for the second particle assignment, a bullet casing effect. Most games have it, I want it, let's make it. So my first attempt at making it looks like this, which is pretty awful. But I tried again and got this much better looking result. I later sped it up a bit more. Finally, I decided to add a bit of a bullet spark effect on hitting walls. I designed the particles after a YouTube tutorial on making sparks and eventually got this result, which I am pretty satisfied with. I tried to add it and then realized that the particles were in the middle of the object they were colliding with. This is because a while ago I sort of cheated by making the colliders of the bullets go really far back. And this is now causing me issues, yay. So I finally set up a system for proper bullet collision detection. Now instead of just using a box collider, each frame, the bullets draw a raycast between where it was and where it is last frame. The bullet draws a line cast between where it is now and where it was last frame. If that line cast, yes it's a line cast, not a raycast, hits anything, then it calls an event that destroys the bullet and creates particles, or damages the player. This also completely eliminated the need for bullets to have a collider at all, they just use raycast, and that should be a good thing for performance. Maybe. Personally, I think after some playtesting, that the stages I've created for this game just don't really work with the movement system. They are far too small, and especially the first and second stages, there just really isn't much room to move around, especially if there's going to be 4 players. So I'm just going to experiment with some new stage designs and try to get one where you can move around more freely and not fall off as easily. So I just put together some ideas and already this is much more fun. You can actually use the movement system. Plus the stage is probably better suited to 4 players. As you can see, I also changed up some of the lightings and colors of the stages. I'm not sure if I like the new look, so I'm going to keep experimenting. The level design is very bare bones right now. It's basically just some boxes with some pretty bad low poly trees on them. Though I didn't really change that this devlog, I'm gonna eventually redo most of the forest models and make some things, like rocks, grass, flowers, better lighting, and just make the whole stage look a bit more alive like an actual forest. Though I kinda like the blocky aesthetic of the stage, so I might keep that. I decided that I wanted to add a ragdolling feature to the game, because ragdolls are good. I made a bunch of ragdolls in the last video, which you should watch if you haven't yet, and I've very easily made a ragdoll out of the player's model, and then made the player spawn one whenever it dies and also hide itself. Then I made the player spawn one whenever it dies and also hide itself. It's not perfect, the ragdoll is not in the same pose as a player, but that can be fixed eventually, this is fine for now. The final weapon that I'm going to be adding to the game for this demo is the shotgun. I already have a model for this gun, so I just need to rig it and make some animations. I think that this gun has a pretty good feeling of power in its shooting animation. It's got quite a bit of kick. The reload animation is different from the other ones because it has an enter reload state, a state that it repeats for the reloading, one for each bullet that it needs to reload, and then an exit reload state. I should hopefully be able to implement this all fairly smoothly. Okay, so now I have the shotgun in. I added a few changes to the gun script in order to add the ability to shoot multiple bullets at one time, and then get all the animations in. There are still a few issues, the reload doesn't loop the correct amount of times, and the spin pickup looks kinda janky. I touched up several animations. The spinning one is now smoother, the shooting one is more powerful, and the reload has just a bit more punch as well. I added to the shooting script, and now the gun repeats the reload animation once for each bullet it needs to reload. But the shotgun is now a more or less fully implemented and polished weapon. Yes, the time has finally come, and I will finally be tackling the quite daunting task of making the game for players. But why is that daunting, you may wonder? Well, for starters, the laundry list of stuff I have to do is longer than Queen Elizabeth's list of deceased pets. I first have to rework the input yet again in order to make the game work with more than one controller. Then I have to find a way to have multiple split screen settings, that way you can switch between 2, 3, and 4 players. Then I need to make a player drop in and out system that allows players to join at the beginning of the game, and I need to add aim assist for the controllers. But you gotta start somewhere, and I started with reworking the input to work with multiple controllers. I've actually tried to do this last week, but that didn't work out, so I'm gonna try again. I looked around online to try to figure out how to use multiple gamepads with the new input system, but I couldn't find any answers. And honestly, I've just had lots of issues with this new input system. It doesn't really seem to be worth all the extra work I'm doing. So I decided to just go back to the old input system because it's so much simpler and actually works with multiple gamepads. I kinda wish I made this decision a long time ago because it would have saved me a lot of time. I came back and reworked my input system for like the 20th time, and now the game is back to working with the old input system. And now my game is back to working with the old input system. So we're basically back to the first devlog. Now I can get to adding multiple controller inputs, but to do all that I need to set up 74 axes and buttons in the input settings. I can see why they made a new input system. This is going to take a while. So I finished setting up all that garbage, and now I can hopefully add controller input for up to 4 player. Anyways, I also ran into an issue with the trigger. For some reason, the right trigger, which is like the big button on the back of the joystick, doesn't work, and it only works whenever I set the settings to get motions from all joysticks. Now of course this doesn't work, because I need to get motion from just one joystick, the one you're using. I have no idea why it's not working, and I looked all around, but I couldn't find any solutions to my issue. I even restarted Unity, and that didn't do anything, so for now I just moved the shooting binding to the right button. Here is the third player. I disabled the UI for now because I need to rework some of it, but for the first time in this game's history, there is now sort of more than 2 players. And now there's 4. I don't technically have 3 controllers, I lost a cable to one of them, but I can switch the 4th player's controls to keyboard controls and move them around that way, to show that it's actually working. After fixing some issues with the guns and player def and crap, I finished up by adding the UI back, but scaling it and moving it to the right size. No idea to add split screen settings, drop in, drop out, and a few other things. The important thing is the 4 players sorta works now. The last things I did were polishing some things, messing up some of my particle effects to make them look better, bug fixing, and trying to implement aim assist, which didn't work at all. In this devlog, I will do a bit of overhaul for my game's art. I plan on releasing a demo for it very soon on itch.io, and I want it to look pretty for its big day. So it's time to get to work. Okay, so first off I'm doing something fun. New sounds. I made sounds last time by taking free sounds online and editing them, and they were okay. Nah, I'm kidding, they were garbage, and now it's time to get some real sounds. I picked up my very first paid Unity asset pack off the asset store. $20 for 9 guns with tons of shooting, reloading, and other sounds. And honestly, it was absolute steal. Implementing these sounds wasn't as easy as just dragging them in. Well, it sort of was, but I wanted to use all these sounds, so it's time for a gun sound system rework thing. I had the support for multiple shoot sounds, multiple reload sounds, which was mostly just used on the shotgun, unique sounds for the first shot of an automatic gun, and a trail sound for at the end of a burst. 2 different sounds for picking the gun up, a generic one that is played for all guns, and the gun's specific cocking sound. So now all the guns have spicy new sound effects. Yeah, I guess I'm pay to win now, but the sound of the pistol alone was worth $20. Now, the only thing that really matters in a game are the graphics. Who cares if your game is awful to play if that tree is extra high quality? So it's time to make some updates for mine. I like the blocky black terrain with the green top, but I'm going to add new trees, change up some colors, and add some new grass to start. So it's been a few days, and I've done some other things in that time other than just modeling, which I'll get to later in the devlog. But I made several new trees, some rocks, and tried making some grass. Though I went through several different variations of the texture and model and color and stuff, I ultimately just didn't think it really worked for my game and removed it for now. I'll probably come back to it later though, it just needed some more work. Now that I have some nice new graphics for the game, I'm gonna make a new stage, so let's do it. I was originally only planning on having 3 guns for the demo, but then I decided to add another because making guns is fun. I introduced to you the AK-47. A solid rate of fire, small spread, and large recoil make this gun really shred if you handle the recoil. Of course, I didn't actually make a recoil system for the gun yet, that'll probably be happening next devlog, but in the future it will actually have recoil, that way guns like the AK-47 aren't just absolute lasers. I was expecting this gun to be fairly straightforward to animate and import, just like all the other guns have been, and it was for the animating part. I was actually really happy with the animation in Blender. I did a trick where I replaced the gun with an exact copy for just a few frames for the pickup animation, and there are two mags which are just animated on the mag objects. They are separate from the gun rig. Now, I didn't think this would be a big deal. I had to reanimate those mags and pickup parts so many times, but it never quite worked properly. I built a 4-player split screen system last episode, but it only works for 4 players and can't be switched to 1, 2, or 3 players. So I'm gonna fix that. I made a basic script for controlling the sizes of the cameras. So I just get references to the cameras and change the viewport sizes, or disable them if they aren't needed. The UI took a few more tries, but I first of all merged all 4 canvases into one, and then made 4 prefabbed panels that can be switched out for each canvas. So now I can actually show things in the game in full screen view, instead of wasting 3/4 of the screen showing other players. I also put together a free cam system that was mostly copied from a forum post I found, and you can see footage of this free cam in the intro of the video. It serves no point in the actual game, but it looks cool in the videos. Third-person player animations are pretty bad right now, so I redid these animations in Blender. I made an idle, running, and sliding animation, but this is at the very end of the week, so I didn't have time to import them, but it will be my first thing I do for the next devlog. And I mentioned I was going to add throwables in the game a very long time ago, and then mentioned it again later. But now I actually have the code in for handling them. Though the animations are very placeholder right now, these are the foundations for yet another thing that'll be finished next devlog. This devlog was only a week long, so I hope you like the short wait. But I'm getting very close to the beta release, and I've decided on a definitive date for the beta. Thursday, October 1st. There are still quite a few major things that I have to finish, like a 3D menu, updated UI, and a new player model. I started off this week with a fairly short day, mostly consisting of planning all the stuff I need to get done by October 1st, but I did make one change from the last devlog. I was planning on implementing new animations for the player model first things, but I'm actually just going to make a new player model altogether. This new model will have new animations, but also stuff like an army uniform and better design overall. Today I began constructing and importing the parts of the 3D menu. I made a 3D model of a couch and a TV a while back for this menu, and so I imported them into a mostly blank scene. This marks the first time that a couch has actually been in couch combat, which is kind of a big deal. I want a simple menu that fits the aesthetic of this game. And what's that aesthetic, you ask? Couches. The game will start with a player drop in and out screen, and whenever you drop the players in, a ragdoll of the player will spawn above the couch and flop down onto it. The second part of the menu will be a stand with game cartridges where you select the mode you want to play. For now that'll just be arcade, but I'm thinking about making a shooting range, free-for-all levels kind of like Halo split screen, and maybe even a zombie style mode with co-op. That's really far out though, but I do like making empty promises, so there you go. The final frame in the menu is a TV that for now will just say play, and I think that stage and weapons selection will happen in a way similar to Stick Fight the game, where you can open up a menu and customize them as you please. But seeing as the demo will only have 4 weapons and 3 to 5 stages, I don't think that's necessary just yet. Another part of the menu will be the options menu, where you can change graphic settings if the first player uses the controller or keyboard and other stuff like that. Today I'm going to finally start building that menu. I built a smooth, lerping camera controller. This can move between points I set up, which allows me to build the menu. I also figured out how to set text to a material on a 3D object, which let me make this press button to join thing. Finally, for some reason I am super happy how the falling couch turned out. I've spent the last few days on the menu, but I wanted to get back to work on the core game today. Today I just want to do a few smaller tasks. I first off made it so that whenever you get shot, you get slowed down. It's a small effect, but I think that it really makes gunplay feel that much more polished in the game. I simply just multiplied your max speed by around 0.6 whenever you're shot. Okay, and also the UI of this game is really old, and I think it's finally time to rework it. I looked at lots of shooters and sketched out a simple and easy to use design for my UI. I want the UI to be easily readable and clean. And those are two things I believe are very important whenever you only have a small part of the screen to work with in a split screen game. The UI is very similar to what it used to be, but now there's a new icon for the gun. It has a darker The background of the UI is darkened instead of lightened like it used to be, and it's just a bit smaller and sleeker overall. I'm still just sticking with Roboto as the font just because it's very easily readable, but it still looks pretty nice. Today I made the UI actually work. I built it out in game and applied it to all the different sizes of screens. Then I went back and modified and updated scripts to make the UI actually display properly. And it is so nice to actually have working health bars again. And the UI works properly on all scales, even the stretched out 2-player scale. The right top of the UI is the only unfinished element, and that's just because I want to add a kill tracker soon with the wind tracker, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. And today I finally decided to re-implement post-processing. I used to have some post-processing, but it was removed whenever I updated to the universal render pipeline last devlog. This time I want to properly implement good-looking post-processing and make the game look really nice. After following yet another brackets tutorial, I'm quite happy with the look of the game. Motion blur is something I want to add in the future, but I don't like how it blurs out the gun, so I need to make it not do that. If anybody has any idea how to do that, it would be helpful if you commented it. I also polished up the core game loop, and you can now correctly transition between stages. And it keeps score, even if you can't currently see it in the UI anymore. I also now store all the scenes that you cycle for the levels in an array, that the game loops through the array endlessly. This is much nicer and easier to use than constantly having to update the code of the game to add new stages to it. Which it makes no sense why I wasn't using an array in the past, but whatever. And this is the first time that the game actually properly worked in a while, so I decided to record some new gameplay footage of 2 players. I was planning on finishing up on Sunday, but I realized I forgot to do one major thing. Well, actually I forgot to do several major things. Weekly devlogs are honestly just too frequent for me, so I think I'll be going back to bi-weekly devlogs from now on. But I will actually keep a consistent upload schedule hopefully, so I should keep things more interesting for all you people. But anyways, on Monday I finished up that new player model I started. I gave him a body and army I had. He doesn't have any animations yet, and I think he needs some more details, but I like how he looks and I'm excited to animate him and actually get him in game. Finishing unfinished things from the last devlog is beginning to be a trend with these videos, so I want to make sure I finish everything in time for the launch on October 1st, so no big additions until after that launch. Today, I'll be polishing up and publishing a demo of my game on itch.io. This is far from a final demo, but I think that setting a date to get one out will give me a good goal, and also feedback and stuff. There are quite a few things that I have to get done though before I'm willing to publish this. I'm giving myself about 2 weeks to finish this game. Today is September 16 on a Wednesday, and my goal date is October 1st, which is a Thursday. I need to get the game loop working again, make a 3rd, 4th, 5th stage, finish the main menu, polish up the UI, just polish up stuff in general, and so much more. I started off making some fixes that I've wanted to make for a while. I made the 2nd stage a bit bigger to make it a bit more fun to play, or I designed a new stage as well. The wall. The goal for this one was to have a stage split in half by a wall, with new bounce pads allowing you to go over them. This is not exactly how the stage plays out though, but I'm happy with it anyway. The stage feels more like a few islands, rather than something split in half by a wall, but that works pretty well for a stage anyway. Right now, I think the game sounds kind of empty. There are just gun sounds, so I'm gonna add some movement sounds. I grabbed a few sounds off a website called Free Sound, and some from Random Folly Sound that came with the Gun SFX pack I bought a while ago. I had foot sound steps that I eventually removed because I just really didn't like them, but jumping, landing, and sliding all have sounds that I am pretty happy with. I also finally got around to fixing the slow motion at the end of the stage, and it now actually works without breaking the game. The UI was a big focus last devlog, and so I decided to finish it up. I added a win counter and a kill counter. The win counter was pretty simple. The kill counter required me to make a system for counting kills, which I mean it's kind of in the name, but whatever. But other than that, I just made all the icons and put it together. The other thing I did for UI was actually make icons out of all the guns, and I'm realizing now, while scripting this, that I didn't actually implement these new icons. So I guess I'll just add that to the pile of bug fixes to patch after this devlog. The itch.io page is also something that I want to do right. I made itch.io pages in the past for my jam games, but they have all kinda sucked. so I want to get this one right. I watched a video over the subject and took notes. Yeah, I seriously took notes for some reason. I have never looked at these notes again. There was literally no reason for me to take them. But whatever. I began preparing the new player model to replace the one I've been using since DEVLOG 2. I removed the extra details from it. I think I'll eventually add some hats into the game, but I don't think that they needed any poorly modeled clothes for now. Next up was yet another stage. The idea for the fourth stage was this big X in the middle of the stage you can get on to get a height advantage. I built the stage in Pro Builder, and I'm pretty happy with this one, and it's quite a bit better than the last stage in my opinion. The audio desyncs whenever the game is in slow motion, and so I tried to slow it down to fit, but it sounded awful, so I dropped that idea. The main menu was my next target. It currently just lets you control a camera around it, so I made a new script to control the menu itself. I made all the code for the player drop in and out. It's really just a mess of if statements, but it gets the job done. When you finish going through the menu and transition to the actual game, the menu controller script spawns the scorekeeper object, which does not get deleted in between scenes, and control stuff like how many players there are, which stages are played, and other important values. Moving on from there, I decided to throw my new rig that I just made of the player in the garbage and use a good old Mixamo auto rigger. Much better. I imported this into Unity to make a ragdoll out of it, but they were intersecting polygons in the legs. I tried to fix this for a while, and then I just cut the legs off and made new ones that actually worked. And I added a ragdoll spawner to the menu. It's slightly randomized, which makes it so that they fall differently every time you start. For the fifth and final stage, I had a very basic plan. 2 big islands with 2 bridges. I basically just put the pieces in randomly and it ended up with what I think is a pretty nice stage, even if it probably should get some upgrades in the future after I played it more. Screen shake is something I implemented for punching and then never used again. And so I came back and added screen shake to shooting. It's fairly simple. I can adjust the length and intensity of screen shakes to suit each gun. I also added screen shake to reloads, so whenever it cocks back or flips the mag out, there is just a bit more oomph. It's Saturday, September 26th, and I've got quite a bit to do this weekend, so let's get started. I made different colors for the different players. This is applied to the player model and the player's arms. The arms took a very long time to get working, but it looks nice. I also did some bug fixing, and now screen shake doesn't just affect the first player's screen. I also made the health bar flash red whenever the player gets hurt. Right now the transitions between stages are sudden and ugly, even with the added slow motion. I want to clearly show which player won and also add a bit more character to the game, so I decided to make some windscreens. I overhauled the canvas system last devlog, so making this windscreen was pretty simple overall. I just designed the UI stuff, made a fade-in animation for it, and instantiated it by the scorekeeper object when the slow motion starts. It turned out to be a really nice effect, and I can also easily add more messages to it. So if you have any idea for messages, then be sure to comment them down below. The last few things I did over the weekend were menu related. I added a bit more polish to the menu. Now the camera pans down and the logo zooms in at the beginning. I also added actual buttons to the menu. The last few days were mostly just polish in preparation to publish the game. I made the ragdolls change color based on which player they are from. I also further polished the menu and the stages. Weapon spawning is a feature that hasn't really been working in forever, so I sort of tried to fix it. It's not great, and on the third stage, almost 50% of the guns fall into the void, but it works for now, and I just increased how fast the pickups spawn on the third stage to try to compensate. Finally, I made a few builds of the game. I kept trying these builds and I kept testing these builds and quickly finding problems with them and going back to fix them. But by Wednesday night, I was finished. Thursday was just making the itch.io page. I took lots of screenshots and short videos for GIFs, made a blurred out background, and wrote a description. It took a while, but I think it looks nice. The logo definitely needs to be redone. And that's it. The game is now out on itch.io. I've been working on this game for nearly 6 months now, and I'm really proud of how far it's come. The beta is far from perfect, but it's fairly fun to play, and that's a good sign. This episode, I am going to be completely redoing all the animations with all my guns in the game. These new animations will be more detailed, have better arms, and hopefully just look less janky overall. I'm also going to bug fix and polish up the game some more. The number one priority for me at this time was creating a patch for itch.io to fix many of the bugs and issues with the game. The first few I fixed were fairly simple. Like, I removed the unfinished throwables from the first player, I made the HP bar flash red again, because that got screwed up. I moved the UI a bit closer to the edges to make it a bit easier to see stuff, but a few fixes took a bit longer. Like muting audio whenever the last player is killed, so sounds don't desync with the slow motion. I also implemented icons for the guns, which I somehow forgot to do. I made these icons a while ago, I just forgot to put them in, so I made a script to switch them out based on which gun you were using. The big issue with the game at this point was the fact that the guns would sometimes shoot right through the other players. So I decided to do a few things. The first one was to make all the guns hit scan. There isn't really a reason for them not to be. After all, the game isn't over long distances, so a bullet drop really isn't a factor. I left in the code for projectile weapons, because I'll probably eventually use that for something like a grenade launcher or a gun that shoots slower projectiles that I can't use hit scan for. The other change I made was simply moving the place where the bullet is shot out of back a bit. This is because the actual model of the gun in-game is quite a bit bigger than it looks from your first-person perspective. It has to be this way to look good, but I used to create all the bullets out of the end of the gun, which would mean that sometimes it would go through the players because you were so close to them that the model was actually going through them. So I made it hit scan, that way I can move it further back without it looking weird, and also this removes issues with the bullets sometimes just going through things without being noticed. The only issue of using hit scan was that I had to completely rework spread. It works, but I realized after releasing this patch on itch.io that it accidentally reduced spread, which made the Uzi absolutely overpowered. I then began work on reanimating all the guns in the game. I was working on a smaller project at the same time as doing this, which you'll see a video over pretty soon. I started out making a model for the arm. It took a few tries, but I got this gloved one that I like. The gloves make the hands easier to see when compared to the arms, and they just look kinda nice. I rigged this all up and then got to work making new animations. The first gun I redid was the Uzi. I actually created a new model for it first of all. The old one was a bit bland and had an issue where it was missing a polygon in the game because of intercepting polygons. The new one has a few more colors and a bit more interesting shape, and it no longer has intercepting polygons. I then rigged up the Uzi and began to animate it. These are the finished animations. I really like the reload one. I think the mag flying out is really satisfying, though it'll probably take a lot of extra work to get the mag working in-game. The pistol was pretty simple. I changed up the model a bit more to make it look a tiny bit less boxy, and then I animated it. The animations are pretty nice, though the pickup animation needs some work. The AK-47 was next. I decided to go in a completely different direction for the animations. The reload is pretty satisfying, but the pickup is pretty bad. I think that I'll move the sliding bar thing over to the other side of this devlog. Though this is inaccurate to the actual AK-47, this will make it less awkward to animate cocking the gun, and will make shooting animations more lively. The shotgun was the last and the easiest. Making the reload was really easy because it repeats, so it's really simple. I got rid of the spinning pickup that I used to have because it looks pretty bad, and the new pickup is just a super simple pump. Now I actually enjoy animating the guns, and it really doesn't take that long overall to animate them. But importing them is where it really falls apart and is the main reason why I don't have like 1,000 guns in the game. It takes forever and there are always 500,000 problems that appear out of nowhere. But whatever, over a few days I imported the models. The process consists of importing the model, then setting up all the animations in the import settings, putting them into the animation controller, adding the model to a gun template, and then endlessly polishing and bug fixing the gun until it feels okay to use. This process also generally requires me to go back into Blender and change up some things that look bad in Unity. Unity's frame interpolation sometimes causes issues as well. The differences in the view in Blender and in Unity can lead to things like the mag just not going completely off screen. I also sometimes have to change the colors in Unity because the materials are either just jet black for some reason or look a lot darker in Unity than in Blender thanks to the lighting. And also, sometimes just animations do not work whenever importing into the animation controller, so I have to try to find workarounds or just go back and switch up the thing in Blender. Finally, things like the magazine that flips out of the Uzi usually require a separate object just to handle their animation, like this weird spinning issue that I did not get around to fixing on the Uzi. Now this sounds very annoying and boring. That's because it is. But it's a process that I have to do each time. I mean, it was a lot worse the first time I imported the models for the guns because I had to develop a process along with doing all this stuff because I had no idea what I was doing. So it could be worse. One thing I decided to do differently with these new guns was removing the idle animations from Blender. I used to make these in Blender, and they were often really janky and bad whenever imported into the actual game. So I decided to do it using code in Unity. I picked up some scripts online and added them to the gun sway script. I had to adjust it a ton, but I eventually got the guns to sway up and down whenever moving. And it increases speed with how fast you're moving, so that looks kinda nice. I'm gonna add more code-based animations like this in the future. Stuff like weapon bobbing whenever you're jumping, a bit of camera bounce on landing to make it look a bit more impactful and smooth, and rotating the guns to the side whenever sliding, kind of like it does in Titanfall. I started off with some basic bug fixes and polish. I was mostly focused on making the animations that I created last devlog work, and in removing any issues that still remained. I made the pistols pick up and reload animations look less scuffed. Then I moved on to fix this monstrosity. I got it much cleaner looking, but it did still look a bit off. Now the AK-47 had an okay reload animation, but I decided to move the pullback thing on the gun over to the left side so I could replace this terrible pickup animation with something less awful and make the shooting animation more interesting. After polishing up the guns, it was time to pause and take a break. Making a pause menu was next on my hit list, so I started to work on it. The next thing I did was get some inspiration. Yes, I am so unoriginal that I can't even design a pause menu without ripping off something. I eventually settled on this really simple 3 random box design. I set up the canvas for it and then set to work coding up everything to work. The pausing itself is pretty simple. I can just pause the game by setting timescale to 0, which messed with physics at first, but I got it working later. Then I got the buttons to call a function when they are pressed on the pause menu, which can trigger different things. Getting the buttons to actually work took a while, but I realized I'd removed the event manager object a long time ago from the game, which stopped the pause menu from working. Finally, I got all the buttons to work in the menu except for the settings button. It took a while, but I eventually have it set up so I can hopefully add more buttons or remove them very easily. I also paused input whenever you enter settings and worked out a few more specific case issues for input. Finally, I made all sounds pause whenever the pause menu was up. The main reason I added a pause menu in the first place was to add settings to the game. So I began to code up a settings menu. I decided to split up all settings into 2 types. Settings for the options are just yes or no. These are stored in a bool array. And also settings where there are a range of options which are stored in a float array. The float array can also probably store multiple choice settings, but I don't have any yet. I decided to make a first setting to set up and test out the settings menu. And I decided on just making a mute setting because that sounds simple and it might be useful. So I might as well make it. I created a UI toggle and a function that is called whenever the toggle is changed, as well as a function that updates the settings whenever one changes, and I had a functioning mute. The main setting I had in mind for this was the sensitivity slider for each player, so it can just actually be adjustable by people who aren't me. I had a basic design for bool settings, so I just copied it over to flow settings and redid a few things. Then I set up the sensitivity settings. It took 8 total sliders so people can adjust their X and Y sensitivities separately, because I'm just that nice. I chose some default values that I thought were pretty good, but I have noticed that the controllers are still quite difficult to aim with. Turning the sensitivity down to 1 makes it a lot more precise, but it also makes the rest of the game near impossible to control. A few ideas I have to fix this issue are maybe just adding some more aim assist, which is easier said than done because I have to code it, but also possibly adding some form of ADSing into the game. I'm not sure about that yet, but I would make sure to try to keep it from being too restrictive and slowing the game down too much if I did implement it. Bug reports were also beginning to pile up, and since I was planning on releasing a new update to the game on itch.io, for some reason there was a bug where players 3 and 4 could pick up an infinite amount of guns, but only the first would shoot. So I finally removed that innovative feature. I then straight up deleted stage 3 because it's disgusting and made it so players could no longer collide with ragdolls and get stuck in them. So I had settings, but they didn't actually save in between games or individual levels. That's pretty annoying, so I decided to try out a Unity feature called Player Preferences, which is a simple way to save settings and stuff. Getting it set up was easy, but actually getting it to work took a few days of just straight up bug fixing. But I then realized that the issue was that I wasn't actually saving most of the values in the code. So after fixing that, it was pretty easy to get it to work. I only realized after publishing this new build that the settings don't actually save after closing the game. I have no idea why, but I guess I'll have to look into this later. Around this time, Unity was having a Black Friday sale, so I decided to pick up a new asset to finally fix input. I bought a nice input manager called In Control for cheap thanks to the big discount and got to implementing it. Getting the players to drop in at the beginning of the game was hard, but implementing it into the actual game was pretty easy. I added some new quality of life features to the game, like I allowed the first player to choose to play either his keyboard or controller. I also finally made it so you can shoot with the triggers, which is so incredibly nice. My journey to input has been a surprisingly long one, but I hope that I have finally concluded the saga with this asset. After fixing input, I decided it was past time to release a new build on itch.io, so I fixed a few bugs and added a screen at the beginning of the game for the first player. It's quite ugly, but so is most of the main menu, and I plan on redoing that eventually, but I have more pressing matters, so I'll probably do it in the future. The new build is now live and is so much better than the old one. If you want the new version, you have to download it again off of itch.io. So the build was out and it was time to relax. Nah, it's grenade time. So I whipped up a model in Blender. Excellent. Then I got to work making a particle effect worthy of the title of Explosion. It took forever. I couldn't find any good tutorials, so I had to go in and actually figure it out myself through... But after accidentally discovering the account of the creator of Totally Accurate Battle Simulator through a very old post of an explosion he made in the Unity subreddit, as well as hours of trial and error, I had a pretty satisfying and pretty explosion. But unfortunately, I also had a deadline for the next devlog that was getting pretty close, so I decided to wrap up development for the devlog here. I still missed my deadline for the video, by the way. Though a pause menu and settings aren't the most interesting things to be working on, I got them done, and so we'll hopefully be able to get a few more cool features done in the next devlog. This episode will mostly just be me laying the groundwork for several new things, as well as making a new weapon. Anyways, I started off working on throwables again. I needed an animation if I wanted to have throwables in the game, so I animated one for the basic grenade in Blender. I have yet to actually implement the throwables into the game, but I should hopefully get that done eventually. I mean, after all, I've been promising throwables since like the third devlog, so it would be nice to get them out soon. I've been focusing on the visuals of the game quite a bit lately, and there's one thing that's been bothering me, and probably some of you guys since the beginning of this game's development. The arms look awful on the third-person models, and they don't even exist whenever you don't have a gun. So I'm hopefully going to finally solve that using inverse kinematics. I have literally no idea how to use them, so it will hopefully be a long process, but I'll finish it by the end of the devlog. The first thing I did was make the current arms invisible to player other than the one who owns those arms. This just makes the gun float, which already looks a bit better. But the floating gun is in a weird position currently, which will look a lot worse if I add inverse kinematic arms. So I decided to hide that too and add a fake gun that is only visible to other players, and move the gun into a different position. In order to make this fake gun, I just copied the gun, moved it over a bit, and made it so that the gun script can handle another animator. Okay, now it's time for the hard part, inverse kinematics. There are thousands of different scripts for it online and a few do-it-yourself tutorials. Initially I tried one of these tutorials, but it was super complicated and probably too advanced for my need, so I just decided to grab a pre-made one, because hopefully that would simplify it for my small brain. Yeah, not really. I first tried using Unity's own animation rigging kit, but it didn't really work, and instead of struggling to use another overcomplicated system, I just tried another one. This one was super simple and was actually working in the editor, so I implemented it into my game, but it didn't handle rotation, which does not look good for my arms, so I decided to try one more time to get one. I finally found one that works, and it's open source and everything, so thank you to Kite Pro for making this great asset, link in the description. It works quite well, and I was all ready to implement it and be done. Then I realized that it would probably be better if the arms were actually part of the player's body. And then I realized that I needed to redo the player's animation so that the arms would do something whenever you aren't holding a gun. So I finally decided that before I went to the trouble of implementing inverse kinematics, I needed to make sure that I had a complete player model. So the process of making the new player models and animations were pretty straightforward. I just stuck some arms on the old model and used Mixamo to auto-rig these arms. Then I animated it based on a reference. Only issue is, it sucked. So I got rid of the old reference and used this run cycle I created a while back but never got to use because I redid the player model. I used it as a reference and ended up with a somewhat decent run cycle. It's still pretty goofy, but whatever, it's a lot better than the other one. Next devlog, I plan on importing this animation and making it so the arms are inverse kinematic when holding a gun and they are animated when not. But I had spent a very long time on inverse kinematics at this point, so I decided to finally do something else and add a new gun into the game. I have a few ideas for new guns. A sniper would be cool, a grenade launcher would be pretty nice as well, but I decided on a revolver because 1, a grenade launcher needs grenades, and those aren't quite finished. 2, a sniper sounds hard to model. And 3, the revolver sounds that came with my sound pack are really good and I just want to use them. Actually, the main reason is just 3, but whatever. So I found a reference for the revolver and began modeling it. The revolver took the longest to model out of all the guns that I've made so far. It's probably my favorite looking as well though. It's not got one of those pullbacks on the back, and it looks a bit more modern than a Wild West revolver, but it's not got a goring gunmetal black one, so I think it strikes a nice bounce. After modeling it, I rigged it and got to work animating it. The shooting and everything were easy, but the reload took a while to get right. I decided to just go completely unrealistic with it and made it fling open, fling bullets into it, and then fling it shut. Just one of these reloads would realistically probably break a revolver, but it's a video game, so it's perfectly fine. The pickup animation was pretty much straight up ripped from CSGO, but it looks nice, so whatever. After animation, it was time for my favorite part, importing. But surprisingly, it wasn't that awful this time. I set up animations, made a new gun object, and got it sort of working. I then added the sounds from the sound pack, and set up a reload sound effect in Audacity. And then it was working slightly better. Then I adjusted the animation in Blender to properly hide the left arm when reloading and made the shooting just a bit more powerful. Then I fixed up a few more bugs and adjusted its damage, and it was done. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I got done in these 2 weeks. I was busy for most of the first week, so admittedly I didn't get too much done. But hopefully next devlog I'll be able to tie up all these unfinished features. I started off the week by realizing that it had been almost 10 devlogs in over half a year since I announced that I was adding throwables. So I decided to add throwables for like the 10th time. But this time for real. I sped up the already existing throwable animation to make it less awful to use. Then I imported that model and animation, which was a lengthy process because there's always at least one small issue I have to fix whenever importing animations. Now after importing it, it obviously worked perfectly first try, so I struggled to make it actually spawn in the throwable. Eventually I realized that I wasn't actually instantiating the throwable in the script, which was a regretful oversight. And obvious oversight. It's actually pretty impressive that I missed this. I continued polishing up the throwable after this. I added a delay between whenever you release the throw button and whenever you spawn the actual throwable. I moved the grenade around a bit, and after this I decided to make a pickup for the grenade similar to the gun pickups. This caused a billion bugs, which I proceeded to fix. Or at least I think I fixed. There might still be some, but whatever. And after this, throwables were finally finished. Whoops, I guess I accidentally already reached the goal of this devlog like 2 minutes in. So I guess I'll just have to do 50 more things. I decided that the guns were just not good enough for me, so I added some more animations to the gun motion animator. These are the same for all guns and are for things like landing, jumping, and sliding. The gun motion animator will also work for adding a smooth transition after throwing a throwable back into the gun. Setting up the animator didn't take long, but the animations looked very jank. Then I realized that the animations being janky was the least of my problems. The gun motion animator affected all the guns differently. It also moved the entire gun object, which means that where it shoots at was changed, which means that if you slide, all your bullets miss. This wasn't good, so I designed a fix. I moved the gun's model, muzzle flash, and other stuff into a new container just called gun model. Then I stuck the gun motion animator onto that instead of just the gun object. Though I had to repair some references in the code, I was eventually able to get this working, and this simple change fixed all the issues I had with gun motion, other than the janky animations. That just took more time. I finalized this new gun motion thing by adding a simple animation whenever you finish throwing throwables that just brings the gun back up, and this looks much nicer than just making it appear out of nowhere, so that's good. After finishing up gun motion, I decided to go back to throwables, that way I never had to mess with them again. Well, until I inevitably mess with them again, but whatever. I made the explosions put an explosion force on all nearby rigid bodies. I also made the explosion damage the player. I decided to use curves to determine how much damage the explosions will deal. This just makes it so that the closer to the explosion center you are, the more damage it deals. But Unity didn't really have built-in curves for values, but it did have animation curves, which I used to put together the system. Finally, I made it so the explosions don't damage the players every single frame, and instead just do it once, and I was done. After finishing up the explosions, I participated in a game jam, which you should obviously watch. I got back to work on the 24th and added some throwable UI to show what type of throwable you have picked up. After that, I decided to turn my attention to pickup spawning. In the current public build of the game, pickup spawning is kind of a mess, to put it lightly. Pickups mostly just spawn over the void and also sometimes clip through the ground. This was not ideal, so I decided to make a new system. I used raycast to detect where the ground is. Then I spawned the pickup above that ground. I also made it so that the pickups only spawn in between 2 points that I specify in the map. So this way it won't always be spawning outside in the void. The pickup spawner only spawns in weapon pickups currently. I'll probably make them spawn in throwables too soon. It could use a few improvements, but it is much better than the old system I had. I animated the left arm punching in Blender, imported it into Unity, set up an animation controller, and fixed the old archaic punching script I made way back in the 4th devlog. And that's about it. The animation is all finished. I just need actual damage and knockback now, which I didn't do in this devlog. Hooray. Currently the stages for this game are mostly garbage. They are tiny, boring, and don't work well with the fast-paced movement system. I had planned on redoing them for a very long time, so I'm finally going to do it. But I'm going to take everything a step further. The game is currently themed around a couch multiplayer party, though you would be forgiven if you hadn't realized this because said theming is sparse and very lacking. But I want to do some things like making a sort of basement for the menu instead of just an empty room with a TV and couch that I currently have. But another little theming thing I thought of was theming all the stages around types of movies. I could also maybe make the stage selector have little VHS boxes for the stages. What I'm going to do is take the current forest theme and completely transform it into a sort of classic samurai movie theme, which will basically be the forest theme plus a few Japanesey things. Other ideas I have for areas could be a sort of cheesy 80s synthwave theme, like Get to the Orange Door or a western theme, but anyways, I got to work making some Japanesey objects, which I'm just going to call Oriental from now on because Japanesey is a stupid word. I made one of those arch things, a lamp, some walls, and bamboo. I went on to create a few more props, like a ton of new rocks, a crate, some grass, and another lamp thing. I finished it all off by making this big cherry blossom tree that I really like the look of. I realized that I can't just throw together stages randomly anymore, so I decided to draw out the future ones. These stages will be much flatter than the current stages, which is a good thing, trust me. But one thing I want to do is to get actual terrain instead of just blocks. I want this terrain to be low poly, so after some googling, I found a workaround that lets me use Unity's terrain tool to make low poly terrain. I just make the terrain in Unity, then export the terrain's 3D model using this handy script I got online. I then import it into Blender, decimate it to make it low poly, and then I can modify it in any other needed way. To finish it off, I just export it back into Unity and give it a mesh collider. The terrain took a few tries to actually get decent, but it works well with the current movement system, though I think it could do well with even more decimation. I also need to remove the landing sound effect, or make it trigger only after falling a certain distance because it constantly plays when moving on this terrain. The new stage isn't finished yet. I still need to make a few more models to finish off the raised segments and the bridge, but it's actually probably my favorite stage I've made. Next devlog will probably be mostly just making more stages. In this devlog, I will be starting from where I left off last episode, and I will finish by releasing a brand new free update for the game on itch.io. The game has had a very flat and basic art style since the very beginning. The blocks were actually inspired by Stick Fight the game, though to be fair, most of this game was inspired by Stick Fight. But anyways, before I really get started making the 3 stages that I needed for the game, I want to finalize the art style. Last devlog, I replaced the ground with low poly terrain that I made in a very complicated system by importing it into Blender and then back into Unity like 20 times. But in the end, I wasn't really happy with it. Not only did it not look great, the terrain wasn't nearly as fun to play on as the old flat boxes were. So I decided to scratch that and go for a different look yet again. I first tried just going back to the boxes but making them all green, and then trying to add like stones to make a sort of castle or fort or something. It turned out pretty bad, but I ended up with a lot more rock models after trying this, so it wasn't all bad. I found a tutorial for this low poly cliff, and I decided that I wanted to make that. It has flat ground on top of it, which makes the game easier to move on, but the sides of the block look much nicer. I also tried adding grass to the top of the blocks for like the 10th time, but it looked bad, so I just scrapped it, probably for the last time. But it was around this time that I began to encounter an issue. While I play the game, sometimes it'll just crash seemingly out of nowhere. But I decided to finish up making all the content and then later fix this issue. It was strange and very annoying as I had to close Unity every single time that it occurred. Luckily for me, for some reason Unity would take like 10 seconds to reopen after this, and like the usual 10 minutes it takes to open, so it wasn't too bad. I'm finally happy with the low poly art style now, and while it's not perfect, it's definitely a lot better than the sort of terrain mixed with flat boxes that I had going on the last time it occurred. Luckily for me, for some reason Unity would take like 10 seconds to reopen after this, and like the usual 10 minutes it takes to open, so it wasn't too bad. I'm finally happy with the low poly art style now, and while it's not perfect, it's definitely a lot better than the sort of terrain mixed with flat boxes that I had going on the last devlog. I started putting together all the stages. My workflow for this was pretty simple. I just exported the Pro Builder shapes from Unity to a 3D model, and then opened that model in Blender. Then I used the Pro Builder as a base to make a model of the stage. It was a fairly repetitive and long process, but it looks so much nicer that it's honestly worth the time. So I got to work completely remodeling the first stage. I added a few improvements as well, like modeling a bridge as well as making some stairs for the ramps. I added a randomized effects to the stairs to make them look more natural and kind of like they are made out of stone bricks, and I like how it turned out. After the first stage, I put together a workflow for making stages that I followed for the second and third one. Step 1, I plan out the level in my notebook. I plan out routes around the stage and important stuff like high ground or set pieces. Then step 2, I look at these plans and make any new needed models or props for them in Blender. This can be anything from just a few new rock variations to bigger things like trees. Step 3 is just making the base for the level using Pro Builder and playtesting it in Unity. I do some of the decoration and iterate on my original design for the stage some here. Step 4 is where I finally import the Pro Builder models into Blender and fancy them up. And finally, step 5 is where I bring these new models into Unity and polish everything up. I've been trying to lean more into the strengths of the movement system with these new stages. Personally, I think it's gone pretty well. There are lots of interesting routes that you can take along the stages. Like, if you time it right on the first stage, you can jump all the way from one cliff onto an arch to the other cliff. You can also get on top of the rock from the third stage, or climb onto the walls on any stage for a quick vantage point. Anyways, this was all just basically a really long way to say that I made the second level, which is the older first level, but better. And then I took a break from level creation for just a bit to focus on polishing up player movement. It feels pretty good most of the time, but I need to fix a few things. First off, sliding gives you too much of a boost in speed, and this makes it so that you can't really slide down ramps because you kind of just boost over them. To fix this, I actually increased the base movement speed, which I felt was just a bit too slow, decreased the slide boost, and basically completely removed any friction from sliding. This is better, but I still feel like sliding might need a bit more of an overhaul sometime in the future. Getting back to stage design, I made the third stage in Pro Builder based on a sketch I made last devlog. Then I went through the full process and completed the third stage. It's a new design based around two high points on opposite ends of the stage and a little walled off area with rocks and an arch. Now that the stages were mostly complete, it was time to get down to really tying off and finishing things. I started off following a tutorial made by LMH Poly, who by the way makes really good particle effect tutorials, and made a leaf falling particle effect for the cherry blossom tree. I think this helped combat the fact that the tree looks worse from below than on top. I went back to throwables in Melee and decided to try to fix them. First off, I just made the throwables actually throw out the center of the screen. Then I got to work trying to fix the issue that crashed the editor because I was getting very tired of restarting Unity. As I suspected, the issue was in the pickup spawning script, as whenever I removed it, the game would stop crashing, so I feared it was an issue with the for statement, as those can get stuck in infinite loops, so I just removed it. I thought this fixed it at first, but it didn't. I had no idea what the issue was or if it was even in the pickup spawner at this point, so I decided to see if it was actually an issue with the editor. So to do this, I simply had to export a build of the game. Oh. When I tried to build the game, I got tons of errors. After trying to fix this for like forever, I found out that some of the plugins that I had were causing issues, namely the one that let me export Pro Builder into 3D models. This was frustrating, as the script wasn't actually used in a game, and more so just as a tool to help me in the editor. I decided to just send it to a zip file, that way I could save it for later, and that fixed the issue. So I guess I have to put it into a zip file every time I want to export the game now. And yeah, the game still crashed randomly in the build, so it was definitely an issue with the game, not with Unity. I took a break from bug fixing and worked on melee attacks. I meant to actually deal damage and knock back the player is punching. The damaging works fine, but the knockback is a little bit janky. Sometimes it works, sometimes the player flies in the wrong direction, and sometimes the punch player flies completely out of this dimension. You can get into some pretty strange flying fights with another player if you both just spam melee. I'm gonna fix this soon, but it's actually pretty fun, so I might add a melee weapon that does this in the future. I finally got down to business and decided to fix this bug. I realized that the issue was definitely still in the pickup spawning script, but I wasn't sure where. But randomly out of nowhere, I realized what the issue was. Before I spawn the actual pickup, I raycast down to check if it's spawning on solid ground, and this uses a for statement because it's supposed to repeat until it finds a place. But it actually just checks the same place infinitely, meaning that if the random position that it raycasts is off the map, then it crashes. So I just made it pick a new random position for each time that it raycasts until it finds a solid surface. That was it fixed it. So after fixing that really stupid crash, the game is basically ready, so I began to make the itch.io page. I made a cover for it first. I used Photoshop and Blender to make one that is kinda goofy, but about 10 times better than the old cover, which was just so bad. I also added some new settings, the graphics quality settings. I realized after releasing that these don't actually change anything, which sucks, so I need to fix them soon, but I also added more sounds and just much more flexible sensitivity settings. Then I polished everything up and exported for Windows, Macs, and Linux as well, because I was feeling generous. If anybody actually uses Linux, then please try out the game and comment down below if it works, because I have no idea. Finally, on February 20th, I uploaded the game to itch.io and completed the page. I'm really proud of the latest build of this game, and while it is still quite unfinished, it is already quite a bit more fun to play with friends than it used to be. This devlog mostly just takes place over 1 week because I was busy spending the other week making an Attack on Titan fan game and a poorly made meme to accompany it. But I wasn't completely useless during this time, as I was sort of writing down some bugs that I needed to fix from playtesting. So to start off on Thursday the 18th, I did some bug fixing. Some of these bugs that needed fixing were fairly obvious, like the fact that you could still punch after dying. A simple if statement fixed that one. The next one was a bit more tricky, like practically half of the pickups fall through the ground in the stage, so I just want to try to make it do that a little bit less. And I really am not sure if this properly fixed the issue, but I just replaced the old mesh colliders with new box colliders. The pickups only collide with the ground, so there really wasn't any good reason for the colliders to be super precise. I mentioned that I plan for Couch Combat to be a commercial game, but as a note, the entire game is available for free on itch.io. So something is gonna have to change if I plan on making money, right? Well, don't worry, I don't plan on taking features out or making the itch.io version cost money anytime soon. But the reason that the whole game is currently available is simply because there has not been a lot of the game available content-wise in the past. But starting fairly soon, I'm going to start not adding some of the things I'm making the devlog to the itch.io demo. But I want to be as open and straightforward with this whole demo thing as possible. So this is what I plan on including and excluding in the demo, and why. The burst rifle is going to pretty likely be the final weapon added to the demo, as I think that 6 weapons is plenty for the demo. I'm going to add one more throwable to the demo, as just having one is pretty limiting. Stages wise, I'm thinking of having 5 Oriental stages available. So one more than I have now, and then one stage from each area after Oriental to sort of sample them. If I add an online multiplayer, which I think I will, it will not be in the demo. Though this is partially because online multiplayer will definitely be one of the last things to develop before the commercial release. The only game mode available in the demo will be the current sole game mode of Arcade, though more options like maybe a set number of rounds might happen. Though I'm trying to have the demos be sort of a sample of the game, I want it to have at least a little bit of content in just about every single category, but it'll hopefully be a decent amount less than the final game. I hope you understand why I'm doing this, and I'm happy to discuss anything about this demo in the comments. Back in the past without finishing them. The obvious example is my previous devlog series, Project Astro. But I've had several before that didn't get nearly as far, like another local multiplayer game that was about fighting over hamburgers, and an Undertale ripoff that never had any real development, but did have an entire notebook worth of planning before I realized that it was really bad, and an Undertale ripoff. But back on track, making sure this game gets finished has been on my mind since I began. The most important step, in my opinion, in doing this was just setting up the game's premise with a simple and obtainable plan in mind. The core gameplay loop for Couch Combat was already designed before even the first devlog, so I've had a good thing to reach for the entire time. Another thing that I'm trying to do to combat scope creep and keep the game on track is participating in lots of game jams. Now, I try to spend the majority of the time working on Couch Combat, but once every month or so, I'm trying to spend like just 2 days or so exploring an idea in a game jam, and I've already made one big boss fight in the Attack on Titan fan game with this in mind, and though they both take some time, I think that they were very worthwhile and fun to make. I decided to make a 4th stage, and I used the most professional software that planned it out, Microsoft Paint. I decided that this stage needed a new set piece, a cave. I put the stage together in Pro Builder, and then it was time to model. After making the majority of the stage using the same methods that I have in the past, I decided to make the cave. After looking around online, I found a cool method for making it. I placed down a ton of tall boxes and combined them all together and used a tool called Remesh to sort of connect them. Then I decimated it until it looked low poly again. After that, I used a bool modifier to make a hole in the shape of a rock for the cave mouth. Then it was time for a ton of cleanup. This took way longer than everything else. I deleted any loose or internal geometry for the cave. And the way I did internal geometry was just literally turning rendering onto shaded mode, and then selecting every single face I could see. Then inverting my selection and deleting all the other stuff. It worked out pretty well. But on importing everything into Unity, I realized that the majority of the faces weren't rendering. After a bit of looking around, I found out that the UVs were messed up, so I fixed them. These were mostly automatically a few functions, but I had to go and manually fix some of them faces. But realizing that UVs were the issues in my models was a great discovery because for some reason I thought it was always intercepting polygons or something. So now I know if I have a few missing faces that I can just flip the UVs. I finished up by adding grass to the stage and then adding birch trees. I just reused the tree models from the forest but changed their colors to make them birchy. And added the leaf particles because those are pretty sick. I still want to add a wind shader to the tree, but I haven't found any good ones that I like yet. But the stage was pretty much complete at this point. There are tons of great and not so great games released every single day on Steam. So I have to be able to make my game stand out if I want anybody to buy it. So I have to have a plan to do that. The first step should be really obvious to you because you are currently watching it. I am making devlogs. While I really do enjoy making YouTube videos, they are also supposed to help market this game and build a bit of a community for it before it even releases. And also just having a free version of this game on itch.io can help. After all, Ravenfield basically completely built its fan base on having a game which you can get for free and run on literally everything, mostly school computers. Other than that, I'm thinking of just adding a replay feature that lets you share some of the goofy moments that happen in game quickly. Maybe just a button you can hit at the end of the round that saves the video which you can then share. And I think this could give me some free marketing, possibly if I do it right. I think I did a good job of establishing a niche for the game though, which was the split-screen multiplayer market on PC. I don't talk about marketing though. What about when and how I want to release it? First off, I don't plan on releasing it in early access. Though I want to add more to the game after its initial release, I don't plan on releasing it until it's got a decent amount of content and polish and options. And if I can, I want to release it on itch.io and Steam at the same time because itch.io is really cool and likes featuring games like mine on its friends page, which should be pretty helpful. No idea about releasing on console, but I might, and the mobile version is a bit weird, but I mean, the game might actually work pretty well for a LAN party game like that you can play with groups, and it's pretty non-demanding, so maybe I'll do it. But this is all really out there stuff, so what's to come in the next few devlogs? Well, I have 3 major goals over the next few months. First, I want to have a complete menu overhaul. This mostly just means the main menu, but the settings menu needs a bit of work too, and a customization menu would be nice too. Secondly, I want to add game customization. The basics of this just mean being able to pick what stages you play on and what weapon spawns, but also having things like a set number of rounds and handicaps would be nice too. Another cool customization feature I want to add is something like Special Smash and Super Smash Bros, where you can alter all sorts of options, so things like movement speed, or maybe even the option for more movement abilities like double jumps or wall running, just really letting you control the experience and play the game however you want. And being able to make presets for these options like Smash Ultimate is a goal too. The third and final goal for the next few months is the most important: more content. I want to finish the Oriental area, make more guns, and begin work on another area, which will probably be the Cyberpunk area. So in this devlog, I'm going to begin making all my minis more professional and actually functional. Be sure to subscribe for more. Now it's devlog time. As usual, I had to start off by just finishing up what I had left over from the last devlog. I polished the burst rifle and added some things like an icon for it. Luckily that didn't take very long, so I got to move on over to the menu right away. I decided to plan out this menu more than I did for the last one. The old menu was pretty clunky and ugly, so I decided to draw inspiration from some menus that I liked in other games. Well, I mean, more like menus that I didn't hate, because I don't really have any strong feelings about menus. It'd be kind of weird if I did. Risk of Rain 2 is a pretty great game, and its menus and UI are nice and simple, while still having some style. So I drew from the design for the settings menu, pause menu, and sort of the main menu. I planned out everything in a sketch. The main menu will be set in a room with a couch that moves around just like the old one. But this time the room has actual furniture and stuff as well, and is just better designed. Menus are the main focus for these next few weeks, so I'm just going to get all the other things I want done for this devlog out of the way first. The player models are receiving another upgrade. I think the bodies turned out much cleaner and better this time, but I do want to add just a bit more detail to them, and the best way I could come up with doing this was just adding eyes. I decided to do these pretty basic ones, which are actually just directly stolen from a certain show, and these models are going to receive new animations and are designed with inverse kinematics in mind, so I can hopefully finally fix the awful third-person models in the game. I decided to make the pause menu as a bit of a warm-up and a base for the new settings menu and main menu. I tried to use Unity's new UI builder, but as there was practically no documentation and I couldn't really find any reason to use it above the old UI, I just went back to that. I did some researching on good practices for developing UI beforehand and found out that it's a much better idea to use tweens instead of using the animator. So I got an asset called Lean Tween and used it. I also got a color palette off a nice website for UI color palettes, and I put the pause menu together and made some prefabs for buttons and stuff. But the one issue that I was having was that it was paused, so the tweening didn't work. But it turned out that Lean Tween had an easy solution for that too, and it could ignore timescale if needed. So I just did that. And then I had a functioning pause menu that looks and feels a decent amount better. So here comes the much harder part, the settings menu. I designed the settings menu based off of Risk of Rain 2's settings menu. The old settings menu I had was way too zoomed in and pretty hard to navigate. I also feared it would be extremely hard to expand as there was no scrolling and everything was so zoomed in. So I think I scaled the new one much better. I then got to work making the settings work again. I made it so that the settings can open a sub-menu to the right with more settings inside. There's a lot of settings. So I made a tab for each controller's options and remapping to test this out. And then I moved the only option currently available in the game into the sub-menu, which is controller sensitivity for each player. This took quite a bit of reworking and expanding on the settings menu script, but I got it working and added in a scroll bar to the menu. The only real issues with the menu now are that the mute toggle doesn't work for some reason, and the sound apparently does not play while paused, so I cannot find a way around that to add sounds to the pause menu or the settings menu for now. Now that the settings menus and pause menus were completed, I got to work on the main menu. I blocked the menu out in Pro Builder and set up camera movement and got the UI all set up. Now I essentially had a completely non-functional prototype of the game, so it was time to start filling it up. I made lots of furniture models in Blender and laid them out all around the menu. This furniture consisted of shelves, a table, potted plants, paintings, and little potted versions of the cherry blossom tree from the stages. I think I'll add figures and stuff from the various stages into the room as I make more stages. I laid these models out and added materials to the walls and made some floor models that would be tiled on the ground. And now the menu was starting to look a bit more complete, but it was still basically completely non-functional. So I decided to start coding it, starting with the first page, the start menu. The about button opens up a little about page that currently just has random text copied from the log for this video. The settings button actually just opens the pause menu and goes into the settings there. But for some reason it takes 2 presses to open it, and I have no idea why, but it still kinda works. The play button just moves to the next stage of the menu, which is drop in and out menu. This is definitely going to be the toughest part of the menu to make, but luckily I already had some of the code made for the old menus drop in and out, so I had a base to go off of. I got the player 1 drop in working and looking pretty decent, but the options don't work. The other players also don't work yet because I don't have the menu working with controllers yet, which obviously is something I need to fix in the future. Okay, I decided to finish the last day of this devlog by making one new stage. I've gotten a lot faster at making them, so I was actually able to make this one in just about a day. I drew out a basic design and then put it together in Pro Builder. It's a long island split in half by an overpass. I tested it a bit and refined a few parts of it, and then I imported it into Blender and put together the final model. It was pretty much all made the same way as the other stages. Finally, I imported it back into Unity and added the new autumn trees, some rocks, grass, and little pillar things. The only other thing I started on was adding some dead zones to the controllers to make it so the controller drift is less impactful to the game, because currently if the controller drifts just a little bit, it's basically completely impossible to control. Dead zones make it so that you have to move the controller button a decent amount for it to actually register, so it gets rid of tiny inputs like drift and just accidental ones. So I added dead zones, but it was impossible to test because without the main menu functionable, the game doesn't really work with controllers because they need to drop in the main menu. Because of that, I will probably be waiting until the next devlog before releasing a new demo because most things in the game are not functionable. But the new menu will have an option for dead zones, so that should solve the drift issue. So I went to get my game moving forward and on its way to an actual commercial release. In order to really get the ball rolling, I'm going to focus all my effort right now into getting a good enough project so that I can make a Steam page for it. It would probably have been a better idea to set up this page much earlier on in development, but I have a much better idea of what I want this game to be, and the game itself is in a much better state now, so I think it's getting to be a good time to make the Steam page. But I don't want to finish the page now and then have to completely redo it in a few months. So I want to finish up some enhancements for the game that I've been working on, specifically graphical ones, before I make the game page and the first trailer. First off, I want to finish the main menu and I want to finally fix the third person player by adding some inverse kinematic arms and improving the animations. I also want to finish adding a new player model and add player customization to the game. If I get all of these things completed, I will feel comfortable making the Steam page and also maybe releasing a new demo with all these new features added. The first week after the last devlog was mostly dedicated to making a game jam for BimLark's Ready Set Jam competition, which I will eventually make a video over. But I still got a bit done. The first thing I did was enable ambient occlusion, which is a graphical effect that makes shadows between objects and overall just gives a bit more of a solid feel to the outlines of objects. I messed with it later to make it look better, but I do think that it added to the overall look of the game and was a much needed effect. After that, I decided to try out adding an actual color palette to the game and using it for the material colors. Up until now, I've just been kind of randomly assigning the colors, just based on what I think looks nice. And while this has mostly worked, I want to try out using a color palette. So I found one online and applied it to the game. Things like the grass and dirt only changed a tiny amount, but it was a much more noticeable things for things like the arch and rocks. The arch is no longer straight red, but has more of a purple look to it, which I really like. And the rocks are also less white and have a bit more of a purple tint to them as well. After adding this color palette, I then messed with lighting and post-processing effects to try to fine-tune the color of the game. I think the final result is very similar to what I had before, but just slightly better. I also added bloom to the game, which I did not have before, but it made the explosions and gunfire look much better. It was a very simple upgrade that had a pretty noticeable effect. Overall, I think that I've found a pretty nice graphical style for the game. It is low poly and textureless, which is not completely original. There are plenty of other games out there that have used it. On the last video, I had a ton of comments that pointed out how my game looked similar to Totally Accurate Battlegrounds by Landfall Games. Most of these comments were perfectly fine and just pointing it out. Some were being a little bit extreme about it. I'll admit that I have been very inspired by Landfall Games in the process of making this game, mostly by Stick Fight the Game, which was the basic inspiration for the core gameplay, and Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, which I drew inspiration from for the art style because I think it really does low poly art style better than most other games. But I didn't want my game to look like a ripoff, so I'm going to fix a part that I think seems a bit too derivative. The player model that I made last devlog looks practically like a tabs unit, especially the head and eyes, so I decided that I would redo it and come up with something a bit more original before animating it and putting it into the game, which I will do later. But before I do any of that, I need to actually get a functioning main menu, because the game is kind of unplayable without one. Last devlog I made the base for the menu, some models, and the start page section of the menu, so now I have to get player drop-in working. This will require me to figure out how to use the gamepad to select UI elements, which will definitely be a hassle, so I need to get started. Although I find a way to get the gamepads to move around in the menu, I realized that it would only support one button highlighted at a time, and I needed to allow up to 4 gamepads to be moving around and highlighting buttons at once for the menu I originally envisioned. And I would have to make my own UI setup for that instead of just using the default one in Unity, and I decided that really wasn't worth it, so I then realized I needed to do a bit of redesigning. I eventually came up with the idea to make it so that the player can cycle between the two options of the menus, which are the hats and player colors, by making the 2 axes of the D-pad on the controller cycle through them. I think this was pretty great, as it not only made it so I didn't have to use any complicated UI systems, which would waste quite a bit of time, but it was also pretty elegant and looked better than having a bunch of boxes. This new system would need a new UI setup to work, so I got to work redesigning the menu to fit. After getting the design in place, I began to set up the code to make it actually work. For now, I'm going to be skipping the customization options and just getting onto the state where you can actually drop in, ready up, and move to the next state of the menu. I'll come back to those customization options next devlog though. So I completed the drop-in menu, and now it actually works. After making it, I took a break to make some new models for the room of the main menu. The drop-in menu was finally completed, although customization was skipped over for the time being. The next screen was the game mode screen, which was much simpler. I simply had to add descriptions for the current game modes that I planned for the final game that come up whenever you hover over the buttons. The only one that is actually available in the current version will be arcade mode. The final step for this basic version of the menu was the final options screen. This is where you can change things like game mode options and also which stages you play on and which weapon spawns, which will also be able to change during the game in the pause menu. But these features are not implemented yet, so I just decided to finish up the menu by making the play button. This button required me to set up the score key, which is just an object that persists between scenes and keeps things like the options, scores, and other variables that I need to make the game work. I finished up making the play button, and now the menu is fully functionable. It is missing all customization and the final option menus, but it's good enough for now. After finishing up the menu, I decided to turn my focus to the player model. To say that redesigning this player model was a hassle would be a huge understatement. I must have made 12 different player models before I finally settled on one that I thought was passable. The final model had a more circular head, no eyes, gloved hands, and a slightly different body than the player I had in the last devlog. I think this differentiated enough from the tabs unit. After finalizing the model, I began to animate it. It actually had inverse kinematics in the legs, so making its running cycle was very simple. I based the sliding animation on one I saw in an Unreal Engine tutorial thumbnail that I saw on Google that I thought looked nice. And I think the sliding looks quite a bit better than the glorified sitting that I have in the game right now. The jumping is also pretty simple, I think it works as well. I imported all these new animations into Unity and got them all working in-game. The transition between some of them are a little bit too slow, but I plan on fixing that in the future. And now I was going to make inverse kinematics, and I've tried inverse kinematics in the past, and it has never gone well. But I think I can do it much better this time because the arms are actually part of the player model now instead of just being a thing I stuck on them. This should simplify a lot of the code. I looked around online and found a simple inverse kinematics package made by Digital Games that I was actually able to get to work after a little bit of fiddling. It doesn't look perfect because it scales the arms a little bit weirdly, but that shouldn't be a huge deal once you get everything put together. I put IK scripts on the player's arm by default, and whenever you pick up a gun, it sets the targets for these inverse kinematic scripts to bones on the gun's arm rig. This makes it so that not only do the hands go to the correct places, but they also move with the reloading and shooting animations. I had to individually set this up for each gun, but I finally got it working. These inverse kinematic arms are a pretty big deal in my opinion. Now the third-person models for the players look much nicer, and I don't just have floating guns. This should make footage for the trailer for the Steam page look much nicer and more finished, and I'm fairly sure that I'll have a game page on Steam by the end of the next devlog. But the inverse kinematic arms are not quite complete, as I still need to have targets they automatically get set to whenever you don't have a gun in your hands. That way it just does running. The final thing I did for this week was just set up first-person guns to be rendered separately from the other things in the game. This was supposed to allow me to overlay them to stop them from clipping through walls and being affected by certain graphical effects. But overriding the render depth of the gun made it render strangely, with the back of the gun rendering over its front. If anybody knows how I can fix this, then that would be greatly appreciated. But moving it to a separate render object was still useful because now I can alter the field of view of the game without altering the field of view of the gun and making it look weird. So you can hopefully expect a FOV slider in the game sooner or later. So I've sort of been talking about how I'm making a commercial game for the glorious platform of Steam for a while now. And I also kinda said that I was gonna make a Steam page for a certain futon fighting game last video as well. Well, I lied. Sofa Scrimmage is not getting a spectacular Steam site quite yet, and the reason? Tax evasion. Well, more accurately, it's me evading having to set up tax information and make an LLC and other stuff that is more or less necessary to set up a Steam page. So the Steam page is not quite available for you to rub your grimy little fingers over yet, and I don't know when it will be. I hope to eventually get a Steam page because it's a good idea to start getting wishlists as soon as I can to appease the glorious Steam algorithm when the game finally launches. Despite all I said, Combat Wombat still received a brand new pouch for the itch demo. Haha, marsupial joke. So you can check that out after watching the entirety of this video, including the end screen. That way my viewer retention goes up, just to show that you are a true combatant. I plan on eventually making it so that you can navigate the entirety of the game with just gamepad input, because it is technically a couch game, so you should probably be able to play it on your couch, but that involves a lot of menus that I need to set up controller input in. I tried out nControl's input module, which works with Unity's default UI event system, but that didn't work at all, so I decided to just do it myself, which seems to end up happening most of the time anyways. I only spent a bit of time on this before realizing there were more pressing matters than making it so that you can menu by only pressing buttons on the controllers. So the script I ended up with wasn't great, and I cut it out of the demo I ended up publishing with this video. But it is progress. The big issue I have right now to face is the fact that some menus, like the settings menus and soon to exist game options menus, are more than just straight lines to navigate. But I quickly moved on from that to doing a bit of tailoring. Customization is a simple way to make games just a bit more interesting for players, and I plan on having 2 simple categories for each player to customize: colors and hats. In the last log of development, I made 2 hats, so I want to make those hats actually work. I did a bit of cleanup with the drop-in menu, including making it reset all values when you go back to the start menu, which makes a bit more sense and allows you to remove already dropped-in controllers. Then I got to setting up the script to allow you to cycle through your clothes. After setting that up, I added the clothes in by making the player script to grab a hat prefab from the scorekeeper and instantiate them on your comically large head in-game. Finally, I just connected it all up and it was working perfectly. Then Unity decided to crash, which actually didn't affect anything because I control S literally 3 times a second. I finalized this feature by making it that while you cycle through hats in the menu, the hats on your corresponding character also change. Speaking of that character, I also moved all the players closer together in the menu and put them on a couch, which looks much nicer and you can actually see the hats clearly now. After that hat-related adventure, I embarked on yet another on a much less sensitive topic: race. I originally tried to use shaders, but I'm stupid, so separate materials it is. The process for adding them in was pretty much the exact same as the last one, so you can go back a few seconds and watch that part of the video again, if you so please. I took this opportunity to touch up some gun animations in the game, and by that I mean just increasing the recoil for all of them tenfold. This is a very basic way to make weapons feel more powerful. I probably will have a full overhaul of each weapon, but that's in the somewhat distant future when I'm better at animating with Blender. So I've been using the exact same footage for this game for about 400 devlogs straight now, and I finally was able to gather some new gameplay with 3 players. I unfortunately was not able to find another controller. After this playtesting, I dove into a bit of bug murdering time. There were quite a few that were simple issues with the gun model, so I got to work fixing them. The Uzi was all screwed up in third person because it takes 2 models because reasons, so I went into the scripts and messed around with parents for a while before finally fixing this issue. I also fixed the burst rifle, which was looking a little bit strange, and just moved the player spawn slightly further away from the ledges, which should help alleviate the whole falling off the ledges on the spawn issue. The final big hurdle I had to clear in the race of this patch was game mode options. Not sure who put a hurdle here, as this game was more like an ultra marathon that took over a month. These game options should allow you to change which stages you play on and which gun spawns, and will be accessible not only on the main menu at the start of the game, but also on the pause menu, which will let you change it at any time without having to exit to the main menu. Now, how I was going to store and save data for these settings had me stumped at first, but then I remembered that custom classes exist. I also remembered that I had no idea how to use custom classes, so I did a little bit of googling. Custom classes allow you to define multiple values and put them into one class. For example, I made a class called Stage Properties, which I didn't put properties in for the stage's name, icon, and if it's enabled or not. I then put these custom classes into an array which could be used for the game mode option menu, and I did very similar deeds for the gun properties. Though I could technically achieve the same result with like 5 arrays of properties, this functions much better and should be incredibly easy to expand upon for new guns and stages. I put together the rest of the basics of the script and was eventually able to get it so that I could search for this array of classes for the enabled ones, and then stick those enabled members into a list on the scorekeeper, which was then used to spawn guns or move between stages. I planned out the UI on paper and made it similar to the settings menu. Then I got to work making it. Everything was going pretty well until I got to making toggles. For some reason, toggles have never worked well for me, especially with scroll views, and after a bit I decided to just make my own toggle script because they are like 2 lines of code. Finally, I got it all put together and added to the main menu and pause menus with a decent amount of difficulty, of course. After that, it was time for saving. Unity luckily made saving settings really easy with player preferences, so I just set up loading and saving functions. After a few infinite loops and a bug that had me resetting the player preferences accidentally right before loading them, and then wondering why they didn't load properly, I got everything all nice and sort of working. But it's not over yet. The menu might function, but is it fly? So I cleaned up the layout of it all and spiced it up with this glorious preview menu that gives you a basic idea of what you're hovering over. For the gun preview, I just used the icons I made in the past, and I took new screenshots for the stages. For the last few days, I just cleaned up the game a bit for the patch. I added some default targets for the arm key when not holding a gun, which looks just a little bit janky, but it's better than just letting them go crazy. A little more bug fixing was the final thing that I had to get done, and well, I did it. Sort of, there are probably lots more bugs, so I exported all versions of the game, which took quite a while as usual. I realized later that the About menu is still just random text from a devlog script, so I guess I should fix that, but I kinda like it. In this devlog, I have an even bigger goal, to make a Steam page for the game and actually get it up and running so that I can begin to collect wishlists. As I just polished up and released a brand new build of the game at the end of the last devlog, I figured it was a great time to record some new gameplay. After all, the game should be in a pretty stable state right now, right? As it turned out, it was almost entirely unplayable. But the main issues all had to do with input and settings. It turned out that I'd accidentally messed up some of the values that had to do with sensitivity and the drop-in buttons in the menu. So to say that this caused a few issues would be an understatement. The most troubling issue was actually with wireless controllers though. I usually only have wired controllers for testing, but this time I did have wireless ones and it turns out that they have tons of issues. Like for some reason the A and B buttons work but the sticks don't. Although I don't really have a good fix for the wireless controllers yet, once I actually get a wireless controller to test with, I should be able to hopefully diagnose the problem. If nothing else works, I guess I'll just have to finally splurge on the expensive input manager Rewired, which I kinda wish I had done from the beginning. But the issues with settings and menus needed to be fixed, so I got to making a quick patch. It took way too much searching, but it turned out that I just mixed up some X's and Y's in the script, which was unfortunate. But I got all the sensitivity settings all fixed up, and the drop-in menu was also just a small mistake. I also replaced the placeholder text for the About page, and the final issue that I fixed before releasing the patch was just making it so that you always have to have at least one stage enabled in the stage picker. This is pretty boring stuff, but it makes the gameplay much smoother. One of the best parts about making devlogs of our game is that it allows you, the viewer, to contribute your ideas to the game. Now sometimes these ideas outright suck, but that's half the fun. This is all to say, give me hat ideas. On the side, I made a few hats to put in the game. I made a cowboy hat, a soldier helmet with a cigarette, and my favorite, a top hat with a mustache. A lad from my Discord server, Crate, actually contributed a little spinny propeller hat to the game. I don't have any actual credits for now, so he gets this little box thing on the main menu. But if anybody wants to make any hats that fit in the style of the game, I'd be happy to add them. I've been working on this oriental area for a long time now, so I think it's time to finish it up. There are currently 5 stages, but I want 8. I think 8 is a solid number of stages for each area, and I can always increase it up to 10 if I have more ideas or something. I've been just slowly putting stages together while working on other stuff for forever now, but now I dedicated a few days completely to just making the last 3 stages all at once. And the process for making these stages was pretty much the same as always, especially since I didn't have to make any new set pieces or anything. Despite that, I made sure to try to make the terrain itself a little bit more interesting. There are more outcroppings that provide cover, interesting routes, and even a sort of inside area on the 8th stage. With the oriental area, I've tried to make sure that everything felt slightly organic, with lots of imperfect edges and stuff. But in the next area I'm developing, it'll be interesting because I'll be able to use a lot more sharp angles. And speaking of the next area, the outrun area. I've seen this aesthetic done quite a few times in recent indie games and even Cyberpunk 2077, and I think it's really fun, so I'm going to go ahead and make an outrun area myself. I began everything by just gathering some references. I made sure to use the ultra fancy software of Microsoft Paint to make a bit of a mood board, and these are the main pieces that I want to put together to make the look of the area. First off, I want neon glow materials. These blocks can be super helpful as they can be pretty abstract but still look pretty good. That should help for designing the stages as I won't have to make as many building models and stuff. Second off, I'm going to make lots of street stuff too, like roads, street lamps, trash cans, and of course cars. The other major look that I want to mix in this area is skate parks. I think that makes perfect sense, as in the game you do a lot of sliding and skate parks should serve as the perfect way for me to facilitate that sliding. So I began putting together some of these pieces. I started simple and just followed a tutorial to make neon materials for blocks. I think they look really cool with bloom, but I need to make sure not to overuse them as they are kind of harsh on the eyes. The ground will definitely not have a grid of them, but instead I think that I'm going to model it in a similar way to the ground I have in the oriental area, but add some glow outlines to the edges. One problem I have with the way that some games do this cyberpunk look is that they just use too much black. This is especially a problem when you get to the orange door, where the ground is sometimes just entirely black and it's hard to tell what you're even looking at. In order to solve that, I have a few ideas. One is allowing the ground to be black, but making sure to always place things on it. This will most of the time be roads, but I might also add some cool hexagons that give that cool isometric style look to it. If this doesn't work, then I might experiment with giving the ground a dark concrete texture, though that might clash with the rest of the game's look as there aren't any textures on anything else. After making these first few basic pieces of materials, I decided to try to make some bigger props. First off, a car. It turned out okay, I guess, but I'll probably remodel it in the future. Anyways, I put it in the game before realizing that I would need to make a custom material or something if I wanted it to have glowing edges. Trying to get the neon edges to work took a while, but eventually I just edited the model a bit and added these lines to its edges. It's definitely not perfect, but I think it's a pretty good first attempt of a car, as I've never really modeled one before. After that, I decided to make something cool, a tree. But this isn't any normal tree, it's a palm tree. A gamer palm tree. Modeling the palm tree itself was definitely the hard part, as I didn't really know how to make its leaves, but it turned out okay. And then I stuck a wireframe modifier on it in Blender and made it glow, and yeah, it's pretty cool now. Other than those 2 big pieces, I made 2 lamps and a trash can. I also tried out making a simple half pipe using Pro Builder. It admittedly didn't really work at all, but it's a start. Well, my days of tax evasion are over. I've decided to actually sit down and set up my tax information on Steam. And it really wasn't all that hard. After a few hours and about $100 later, I had a Steam page waiting to be set up. Fun fact, Steam counts the fee that you have to pay to set up the page as a normal Steam purchase, and you actually get 10,000 Steam points off of it. Which is kind of funny, as I'm just now imagining that EA's Steam account probably has like millions of Steam points by this point. Too bad the Steam store itself is about the most gimmicky way to get people to spend more money in the history of gimmicky ways to get people to spend more money, so I don't really have anything to use those Steam points for. Nevertheless, it's Steam page time, and I just had a blast filling out tons of descriptions, guessing on a bunch of system requirements, and making approximately 100 slightly different pieces of art, most of which aren't even going to be seen because they are in the library, despite the fact that I'm only putting up the game for wishlisting right now, so you can't even access it in the library, and all that art will probably be redone by final release. It didn't take that long. And look at that, doesn't it look cool? Sofa Skirmish is becoming all grown up. Now if only the actual game was just a bit more professional. Now, I didn't technically have to make a trailer for the game for the Steam page, but I kinda want to. One strategy that I've seen pretty often for making trailers for indie games is to use classical music. If your game is more serious, it makes it look all dramatic and sophisticated. And if your game looks, well, like mine, then it makes it look only the more absurd. And since I don't have any music made for the game yet, I think that's definitely the best way to go for me. In order to find some classical music, I just looked up one of those 50 classical songs that you know but you don't know the name of videos and choose one that I thought would fit. The song is called Infernal Gallop. The one issue I have with making this trailer is actually just recording footage for it. And unfortunately, a decent amount of this footage is going to have to come from fairly old recordings of gameplay, as I don't have enough people to record a bunch of trailer gameplay, and the most recent gameplay recordings I got were unfortunately lost as I accidentally recorded the wrong window of OBS. But doing just a bit of planning, I had started to make the trailer. In the process of perfecting it, I had quite a few iterations. The original started with a lot of shots of the stages rotating. But after a bit of criticism from a few helpful people on Discord, I added a new part to the start of the trailer that almost served as a preview of the trailer in the first 7 seconds of the trailer. A lot of movies will do that nowadays. I also cut down on the stages, rotating shots, and overall I got the trailer looking better and moving a bit faster, but I made a mistake. I used a recording of the classical song thinking that it was copyright free because it's like 200 years old. But it turns out that that specific recording was actually copyrighted, and the copyright-free version of the song had a slightly faster tempo. So I resynced the entire trailer to this new song and made a ton of other adjustments. And then I also used a free piece of software to automatically up the frame rate of the gameplay to 60 FPS, which made the video feel a bit smoother. I also tried to upscale some of the lower quality gameplay to HD, but I didn't have any success, so I just replaced the lower quality gameplay with some other. The final thing to do was just to wait. I had to wait for the Steam page to get reviewed by Valve because I wanted to publish this devlog alongside the Steam page. It wasn't too big of a delay and I worked on the video while I was waiting, so whatever. But as of the release of this video, the Steam page is open and now you can go and wishlist the game. Wishlisting actually really helps out, as it boosts me in the Steam algorithm whenever I actually release the game, and so it would be incredibly helpful for me if you want to wishlist it. One thing before I end this video though, I just want to mention that I've been thinking about the whole theming of the game a bit more. Since the different areas are themed around genres and movies, and since there's a general retro couch theme going on, I decided that I should eventually make some VHS style covers for each area. I sketched out one for the original area and one for the Outrun area, and you can see my great art skills in display. The Oriental one is a samurai movie called The Last Dragon Emperor, which is just about the most generic samurai movie name ever, and the Outrun one is Neon Punk 2 Trial by Friar, which sounds like a very high quality sequel in my opinion. And I'm currently starting on a brand new setting for my game, the Outrun area. The Outrun area will be filled with neon lights, flashing signs, and brand new ways to traverse its not very crowded streets. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it. So I actually started on this area last devlog, but I did not get super far. I mostly just made models and made plans for it. But the first thing I want to do in this devlog is to add wall running. Wall running is a mechanic that lets you run on walls. It's used in other fast-paced shooters like Titanfall 2, but I'm going to do it just a little bit differently. Wall running everywhere works well for a game like Titanfall 2 with its much larger maps and decently high difficulty expectations. But I want my game to be pretty easy to pick up and play for people with little video game experience, and having such a high-speed moveset would make it so much harder. Plus, the game and its maps just aren't designed for wall running. But I have a pretty simple solution. I'm just going to add specific walls that you can wall run on, and they'll be exclusive to the outrun area, and it'll add a bit more uniqueness to the area's level design when compared with the rest of the game. In order to make wall running, I just quickly first modeled the wall running walls. They are really just boxes with neon outlines and arrows, so they did not take very long. Now, actually programming wall running could have been a difficult and long process, but luckily I already did it. Earlier this year, I made a game for a game jam called The Final Frontier, and it has wall running in it. So I just took wall running from that project, slapped it into my current movement code, and duct taped it all back together. And just like that, you can now wall run on certain walls. Speaking of wall running, my game is currently available to wishlist on Steam. Wishlisting the game lets you know whenever I release it and is also really helpful for me. So if you are at all interested in the game, then please wishlist. The other new stage object that I'm going to quickly put together for the outrun area is a jump pad, but I already made a jump pad a long time ago, somewhere around devlog 4 or 5, so I stuck it back in the game and it actually still sort of works. All the pieces are ready, so I'm going to finally begin to assemble the first stage. I went about building the stage about the same way that I always do. I used my incredible art skills to sketch out a design for the stage. It's pretty simple, and it's very symmetrical this time around. Just a palm tree, some ramps, and 2 walls that you can wall run on. Then it was time to start modeling. In order to make stages, I always start by putting together a basic version within Unity using ProBuilder. ProBuilder is very quick to use, and I can also easily test my stage to make sure that I have things like scale right. After making this prototype of the stage, I exported all to Blender, which is a free 3D modeling program, and within Blender, I start adding more details and stuff. Since this is my first time making an outrun stage, it took a lot more experimentation for me to find out what exactly I wanted. But I added lots of neon outlines and a bit more complexity to the shapes. It's not as natural looking as the oriental area, and instead has more of a digital pointiness look, which makes sense since it is low poly and also digital. Finally, I put together a few neon signs to hang up around the place, and selected a free skybox that I found on the asset store. It actually ended up having pretty much the perfect look I was looking for, so I think I'll just stick with it instead of making my own, as I'm pretty terrible at making skyboxes anyway. While most of my time was going towards making the outrun area, I also finished up some of the polishing that I've been doing for the last few months. First off, I made every button in the game look better by using the actual outline component in Unity that I had no idea existed. Then I switched out the font for something a little bit better looking and added the game's logo to the main menu instead of just some basic text saying Couch Combat. And I finished it all up by adding some animations to the menu using a custom script I made for UI animations. Though all those improvements were related to UI, I also finally got around to fixing the player hitboxes. You used to just have a bean for a hitbox, but that was inaccurate and it didn't support headshots, so I used a new genius method that I invented to make somewhat accurate hitboxes. First off, I just took my rigged model and I used Unity's ragdoll creator tool on the model, and this gave me a ragdoll with terrible colliders. So I fixed the colliders, removed all the rigid bodies and joints and stuff, and turned all the colliders into triggers. Then you have a beautiful colliders that actually move with the animation and also aren't super complicated. So yeah, colliders are actually pretty accurate now, and headshots also deal a bit more damage. Though I should probably add a new sound effect for headshots as well to really emphasize them. While I asked for hats last devlog, I wonder if I actually got any. Wow, I was not expecting a response this big, but sure, I'll take it. I found the whole modeling thing, hats are super easy for me to implement, so I might as well just throw them all in. If I didn't include your hat, by the way, it probably doesn't mean I hate you, though it might. Most of the ones I didn't add just didn't really fit the style of the game or were very similar to hats I already had in the game. Though for now you can just keep sending me hats if you want to, and in the future I think I'll plan it out more and host like competitions to make hats that get in the game. I want a decent amount of hats in the game, but if I have too many then it'll just be kinda messy, and hats that are in the game will all seem less special. Nevertheless, I implemented 8 new community created hats into the game, and I also added a simple system to credit them in the drop-in menu. Thank you, however I pronounce this, Crate, Black Shadow 1, and especially Nitric Wright, who made 6 of the hats. It took me around 6 months to make the 8 stages of the Oriental area. Of course, most of this time wasn't spent making the stages, but rather all the stuff around them. This meant finalizing the art style, making weapons, new player models, the main menu, and just a ton of polishing. But to be honest, the real reason that the Oriental area took so long was my biggest mistake that I made while making Couch Combat. I got super disorganized. Though I definitely made a lot of progress over the last 6 months, it really did end up taking longer for me to get the game to the point that it's at than I expected it would. Now, making a game always ends up taking longer than planned, but a good way to avoid it taking too much longer is actually just planning more. If instead of just working on whatever I felt like working on at the time, I had actually sat down and properly set up goals and tasks for each point in the game, I would be at a much further point in development than where I am right now. So beginning now, I'm just gonna start planning out everything a little bit more. Starting with this outrun area. I slowly put together the Oriental area while making other stuff, but that was a mistake, so I'm gonna buckle down and do the entire outrun area in just about 8 days total, though there'll probably be a break in the middle because I kinda have to make this devlog. And I have all the steps until release planned out as well, albeit with much less specific time expectations. After the outrun area, I'm going to do a small GUI and reticle overhaul and then completely remodel and reanimate every gun in the game. After that, I'm going to put together some smaller game modes and then more areas, and it keeps going. Focusing on one specific thing and completing it before moving on is just a great way to maximize efficiency, and I want to make sure to waste as little time as possible, as I don't feel like working on Couch Combat for another 15 years. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm already halfway done with the outrun area. I made 3 more stages in 1 day each, and I'm pretty happy with each one. The second stage takes place in what kind of looks like a parking garage that is 2 different levels stacked on top of each other, which is new for the game. The third stage has an absolutely massive tower in the center of it, which probably makes it the most unique looking stage in the entire game. And finally, the fourth stage is a bit more basic and has design pretty similar to the Oriental area, but it has a nice color palette and some wall running. So yeah, the new outrun area is already halfway complete and will be finished by the next devlog. It feels really nice to be making quicker progress, as the Oriental area was painfully slow whenever it came to that. For the first stage, I'm going to make something pretty big. It's going to be 2 levels tall with a lot of space in between and wall running walls between the 2 sides of the upper level, which is split. There will also be some jump pads available to get to the top from the bottom, and then, after planning this all out, it was time to make it. I blocked it all out in Pro Builder and ended up adding a big tower in the middle for cover and movement options. After I had a stage design that I was happy with, I took it and threw it all into Blender for the second step. In Blender, I made all the final meshes and more details, mostly just the neon lights though, and after a few final touches, the stage was done. For stage 6, I decided to go with the tried and somewhat true method of just having a bunch of islands to jump in between. I sketched it all out and made sure that there were approximately 15,000 different routes that you could take around the stage at any given point. Then I got to work. First Pro Builder, then Blender, then done. While I am partially skipping over this stage just to make the video a little bit less repetitive, this stage actually took me much less time to make than the others, so it's kind of accurate. I decided to make stage 7 large and flat, and I also made it take the shape of a road that goes through the center of it. After making a very basic sketch, I started to block it out. This one changed a pretty large amount during the process of pro building. Is that a word? Anyways, I added more and more stuff to try to keep it from feeling too empty, and finally, I finalized it in Blender. But at this point, I was beginning to realize that I'd been building all these stages with like 3 unique pieces. So I sat down and put together a bunch more props in Blender. I made a lot of smaller ones, like traffic cones, a bench, and a barrel, and I also made a few variants of tires and tire stacks, as well as a new traffic light. Then I went through all the stages that I had already done and scattered some of these new props about them. And now that the previous 7 stages have all gotten their glow ups, it was time to finish this and make the 8th and final stage. And for the 8th stage, I had an absolutely crazy idea. I made a bridge. It was kind of crazy that it took me until the 8th stage to make a big bridge, but I boxed it out, 3D modeled it all, and decorated it with a few of the beautiful new props I have laying around. At this point, the outrun stages were all but done. The only thing I really had left to do, which I didn't actually get to during this devlog, was fixing the jump pad. It's still incredibly inconsistent, so I need to get that looked at. Lately, I've been giving a bunch of sections of the game attention. First I redid the main menu, then the settings menu, so now it's time to fix the UI in the game, as it's pretty bad. The whole bunch of boxes thing just isn't really working, so I need to freshen it up. But I have quite a few things to think about whenever making this UI. First off, and most importantly, I need to make it very readable. In 4-player split screen, you get half the screen space that you usually get for UI, and generally you'll be further away from the screen as it's probably on a TV or something. I'm going to try to account for this by keeping the UI as simple as I can. Other things I want to keep in mind whenever making this UI is how much it obscures your view of the game, and also how much you have to move your eyes around to keep track of things like ammo and health, and also how well it goes with the overall style of the game and the UI. After looking around some online and sketching, I prototyped the HUD in Photoshop. It is very simple simple and straightforward, and I think that's perfect. It's also all at the bottom of your view, so it won't obscure as much of your view, and it's also composed of just a few pieces. First off, and most importantly, your health. The health bar stands out as the brightest colored thing on the screen, and I also plan on coloring the health bar based on your character's color. I just haven't done it yet. Next up, on the right side, you get an icon for which weapon you're currently holding and a big ammo counter. The weapon icon isn't 100% necessary, as you can sort of tell what you have from looking at the game, but it still helps to know for certain. There's also an icon for what grenade you have equipped. It's pretty big, but that's because the icon will be the only thing indicating what sort of grenade you have equipped. I will probably make this box only appear if you have a throwable picked up. Finally, I also concepted text that comes up across the bottom of the screen that tells you what you just picked up. This will only be visible just after picking up a gun, and once again, it's not really necessary, but I think it should help. None of this UI is actually programmed yet, though I do have a basic working version of it in the gameplay that you're watching. You might have noticed that the kills and win counters are missing. The reasoning is simple. You don't really need to know your kills or wins during the middle of a round. In fact, you probably want to check them most at the end, which is when they are the least visible. So I removed them from the main UI, and I'm going to redo the win screen to address these issues. I haven't started on this either, but I do have a very basic sketch. Across the top of the screen, you will still see the goofy win messages, but there will also be a table that shows up that has everybody ranked by wins with kills listed. I'm also going to make your screen go black after death and have a message saying who kills you, and I'll make sure to spruce it up with animation so it looks nice. In the past month of development, I've been doing a lot of animation, because if I want to release this game, the guns need to get a bit of an upgrade. This is already the second time I'm redoing all the gun animations in my game, so I need to make sure that they are all as close to perfect as I can get them. I'm shooting to get all these animations to professional quality. And when I say that, I don't really mean AAA game quality, as my game has low poly models anyway, so that level of detail isn't needed or possible. I want each animation to be snappy, satisfying, and not janky. It shouldn't distract from the gameplay, but it should be nice to look at. That's what I consider a professional standard. But in order to achieve these somewhat high standards of animation, I need to start with a good foundation. So I'm going to do my research and put into place all the necessary parts to ensure professional quality. The first layer of the foundation is just the arm rig itself. I'm going to redo the arm model and rig, and because I'm not very good at 3D modeling humans, I'm going to follow this very convenient and brand new tutorial by Single Sapling Games. By following this tutorial and the ensuing one about rigging the arm, I was able to make a model that not only looked better than my old one, but was much more functional. This new arm rig has inverse kinematics, which allows me to pose the arms with much more precision. It also has better joint topography, which keeps the arm from deforming weirdly at arm and finger joints. Now that I had a new arm rig, I got to animating some brand new guns. With the new precision I got with the arm rig, making high quality animations was a breeze. Yeah, right. The main two factors in how good an animation turns out are skill level and the amount of iteration. In order to get an animation looking functional, you only really need to go over it once. But to get it great, well, let's just say it takes a lot of free time. And the issue is, I don't have a lot of free time. So I've been working through these animations for quite a long time, but I'm still making progress. Although these guns are all in different states of quality and progress, I've started work on 4 out of the 7 guns. The pistol was the first one I started with, and it's also the only one I'd considered mostly done. The Uzi is pretty close to done, but the reload animation needs some work. The shotgun has a ton of issues with importing its Unity and is in a very janky state right now. And finally, the revolver has pretty much had no iteration, but the base is complete. I'm pretty proud of how the new pistol animations have turned out. They are by far the most satisfying out of any animation I've ever made, and I achieved this with a secret weapon: curves. Blender has a curve editor in it, and curves basically allow you to have much more refined control over the motion that an animation takes. A basic example is just setting a keyframe's interpolation mode to exponential, which will make it much snappier. This is great for shooting animations and parts of reload animations. Here is the pistol's reload animation with just the basic default curves, and here is the same animation but with some basic curve editing. It is a small difference, but the final animation ends up feeling much nicer in-game. I'm going to be releasing this game fairly soon, and so if you are interested, then be sure to wishlist the game to stay up to date and get the game whenever it releases. Hitting the wishlist button is something really simple you can do to support the channel and the game, as Steam promotes games more whenever they have lots of wishlists. I've realized that if I entirely focus on one thing at a time, it works pretty well for like a week or two, but after that my productivity and quality of work goes downhill very quickly. I was able to get away with just doing a sprint to get the outrun stages done over the previous month, but I had to take a break from animation as I tried to do it all at once as well. And by the end of the second week of just animation, I was getting basically nothing done. So I decided to complete the new UI overhaul that I've been working on for a while to take a break from it. The windscreen still needs an overhaul, so I got on that. The process for designing the windscreen was fairly simple. I just put together a mockup in Photoshop and then used pieces of said mockup to build it in Unity with the correct UI components and everything. For the new windscreen, I needed to get a table of the player's scores ranked from best to worst, which turned out to be a pretty difficult thing to do. For someone more experienced in programming logic, this would have probably not been that hard to do, but I tried using arrays, list, and finally ended up making a new class that just stores each individual player's number, score, and amount of kills. Then I used a very basic sorting algorithm to cycle through all the players and sort them by the highest wins, and I also decided ties based on kill count. Using the new setup, I was able to finish the windscreen, and after some polish, it now looks like this. I recently did some playtesting and I found a few issues. The worst one was that the time to kill was insanely long, but this was not because the guns didn't do enough damage, but because they were actually all really hard to hit with a controller. The best way for me to fix this would obviously be aim assist, but that's a big thing to implement. I need to do it though, so I have set aside some time after I complete the gun overhaul to finally tackle proper aim assist. But I also did some balance changes, like reducing the spray of almost all guns in the game and also fixing some collision issues. Other smaller issues that I tackled were finally adding sparks back whenever you hit things, fixing the weird spinning IK arm, and redoing how pickups work. Now they are much more in line with a normal FPS and are less frustrating, although there were a few bugs with the triggers I need to work on. I also created some brand new animated skybox for the stages using a new asset I got in a Humble bundle called Procedural Sky by Pinwheel Studio. Link in the description if you're interested. I even made a new skybox for the Outrun area as well. It also even has one of those cool Outrun suns, so I'm pretty happy with it. For a while now, one button has set idle in the main menu, the rules button, so I'm gonna fix it. Rules are basically options that you can only set before starting a game, unlike game options or settings which you can change at any time, and these rules will mostly be over things relating to the game mode, like the amount of rounds and the scoring system, so I'm just gonna go ahead and implement some new ways of playing the game, just in case endless seems a bit pointless. There will be 3 different arcade modes: endless, one where you just play for a set number of rounds, and one where you play until a player reaches a set amount of wins. After either of the non-endless modes ends, then you'll be sent back to the main menu and you'll see a new windscreen. I built all the logic for these game modes out and before long had them functioning, so I figured that I should get to making the actual menu. But I had made tons of menus already, a pause menu, settings menu, main menu, and a game options menu, so I figured that I could do this really quickly, maybe in like 30 minutes. Well, it turns out that I'm really bad at estimating development time, because it took me 2 hours and 19 minutes to make the new menu, which was almost 5 times longer than what I guessed. Nevertheless, here it is, the glorious rules menu. Let's try to add online multiplayer. I'm sure it'll be fun. You might be wondering how I ended up here, trying to redo my entire game's code in order to add online multiplayer to a game literally called Couch Combat. Well, it all started last devlog. Be sure to wishlist the game on Steam if you are interested, because I am planning on adding online multiplayer and releasing the game fairly soon. Well, it was pretty much all downhill from there. My game is called Couch Combat and I've been developing it for nearly 2 years now. Throughout all of its development, I've been making devlogs where I showcase my progress. Although this devlog is shaping up to be more of a eulogy. Not sure how that works since I'm the one running it for myself. Oh crap, this is supposed to be dramatic. The game is a split-screen FPS that I'm developing for Steam, which you can wishlist, by the way. I'm going to be releasing it completely for free, which I'll be getting to later in this video. Wishlisting is easy and is a great way to support this game's development, as it encourages Steam to show the game to more people. Oh, what just happened? I just blinked out for a second there. Nevertheless, let's go back a few weeks to where it all began. Okay, I think that's enough generic tropes for one video. Before multiplayer development caused my untimely demise, I was just working on finishing up the development of a few new game modes. I started on them last devlog, and they were mostly done. I just finished by programming a results screen which displays all the players ranked first to last place by wins. It's not beautiful, and I think that it, alongside most of the main menu, should get a bit of an upgrade to its looks now that the main menu itself is complete. Other than that, I just reverted the pickups to the old version, where you point at them with the reticle to pick them up, which just works better. The next thing I decided to focus on was improving the aim assist, as I had an idea on how to do it. Currently, aim assist just works by slowing down your rotation speed when you're pointing at a player, but that only does a bit, so I added something called aim magnetism. Aim magnetism just slowly lerps the rotation towards the nearest player whenever you are close to them. It's finicky. Having too much is weird, and too little does almost nothing, so I'm still messing around with it. I'll probably make it an option in the settings menu, but the thing that really makes aim assist weird to develop for in my game is that there's no ADSing. Games like Call of Duty on consoles usually just apply lots of aim assist whenever you aim down sights, which works, so I'm wondering if I should try adding ADSing into the game. I don't think it would be that hard. I might just have to make some new shooting animations for it whenever you're in ADS mode, but I don't know if it would really fit the game, and I've developed the whole game without that in mind, so I might not do it. But after doing all this, I decided to start work on online multiplayer. My plan was to use Mirror and Dapper Dino's tutorial series over it, and while the tutorial series seems good, I really don't think I have the necessary IQ to understand it. I'll spare you the details of the time I burnt trying to get the basics working, but it was not pretty. My game was not designed with online multiplayer in mind in the slightest, and a lot of the internals of the code are a bit messy to say the least. Although I tried my hardest to give the game a solid foundation whenever I was beginning this project, I think my lack of experience with game development and Unity at the time kinda made it inevitable. But the thing that really made me decide against the implementation of online multiplayer was simple. I didn't enjoy developing it. I dreaded working on the game, especially since I knew that all my time spent working on it would not only be unenjoyable, but I would probably make little to no progress. So I refocused. The game is first and foremost a split-screen multiplayer game, so I'm going to focus on content and polish rather than on online functionality. Honestly, I want this game to be complete somewhat soon, so I'm going to try to avoid any further scope creep. So yeah, that's how I got here. Anyways, it's time to go back to fun stuff, like grenade launchers. Last devlog was all about guns, Couch Combat is all about guns, and this part is all about guns. With a new appreciation for how making guns is not multiplayer dev, I actually flew through the process of making the remaining guns for the game. First, I redid the shotgun animation, which was pretty basic. It's satisfying enough simply because it is a shotgun though. I decided not to reanimate the burst rifle, at least for the time being. It's always been my least favorite weapon from a gameplay and graphics standpoint, and animating it would take forever, so I'm not going to put in the effort right now when I have much better old and new guns to work on. So I focused next on the revolver instead. The revolver probably had the best animations in the game before the new updates, but I think I managed to get them even better now. You spin the revolver all around because apparently this is CSGO and it's great. But one thing that the game doesn't have enough of is explosions. There are grenades, but they kinda suck. So I made the grenades better by making them explode much faster, which makes them more useful. But I also decided that the next weapon should be a grenade launcher. I started by just taking the pistol and modifying it to shoot a projectile with gravity instead of just raycasting. I then made that projectile explode on contact with the ground and with players. The explosion for the grenade launcher is smaller and less damaging than the grenade, and it also does half the damage to the person using it, so it is actually very viable and fun to use it to grenade jump around the stage. I modeled the grenade launcher and animated it afterwards, and for the sounds I decided that I would get creative, and I combined a part of the shotgun reloading sound with a cannon sound effect in the gun sound effect pack I bought off the asset store to make the grenade launcher shoot effect. Finally, I redid the AK-47 animations and got them back in the game. I think that the gun still needs a big boost to fire rate to make it actually be viable and fun. The different themes of the game are based on movie genres, and I already have an area based on samurai movies and an area based on dystopian or outrun movies. And I guess that really only leaves one final genre to cover, rom-coms. And what's more romantic than plowing a field all day and getting drunk at a bar? So I'm going to do westerns. The maps will be somewhat similar to the samurai area, but there will be houses, many of which will have sloped roofs which you can slide on. There will also be lots of explosions. First off, explosive barrels which litter the stages, and shooting one will make an explosion that deals 60 damage. They can be launched by other explosions and can be pushed around. The other object of explosive potential is a detonator. You can jump on it and it will detonate a piece of TNT stuck on a spot in the stage. The detonator does more damage, and the TNT is generally placed in a powerful position in the stage. Because you cannot simply disarm the TNT by shooting it, it makes the area near the TNT dangerous to be in. It is much harder to actually get somebody with a detonator, but when you do hit them, it is an instant kill. I currently have 3 western stages completed, and there will be 8 in the final area. I'm making pretty good progress, but it takes quite a bit of time to make them, as I have to model the houses individually. I use all the pieces of the old houses to make the new ones, and I reuse houses occasionally, but I'm trying to make there be a decent amount of variety in the stages, so I steer clear of making just a few and using them over and over again. But the later stages will be easier to make, as I will already have plenty of models, and I can instead spend time on making unique centerpieces for individual stages. Hopefully I will have all 8 stages complete by the end of the next devlog. I playtested the game with a friend after making all these updates, and I noticed that there were still some lingering issues that I had with the game. I've had them for a while, but I've not gotten around to solving a lot of them yet. The main one was that shots do not land, and the new aim assist is not helping at all. But pickups also still fall through the stage, and with the new projectile-based weapon, the grenade launcher, the projectiles sometimes just go through the stage at a certain angle. This sucks and I really need to fix it, but fixing jank is what the last stages of development are all about, so I got on it. First off, I just reverted the hitbox back to its old bean shape. This is less accurate, but it feels much better when shooting at it. Ultimately, I don't think precision is what this game is about, so I'm not really against some form of bullet magnetism. I messed around a lot with the values of aim assist in the game, and though it's still not perfect, it's a lot better. And I also fixed some bugs with aim assist that made it work on dead players and ones that didn't even spawn in. Finally, although I haven't done it yet, I'm going to implement raycast to check for clipping and the collision of both the bullets on projectile weapons and the pickups, and I'm not sure why it's taking me so long, but I need to get to it. I then playtested it again, and the game felt much better after making these small improvements. Online multiplayer development is hard, and it's not really something I want to tackle with this game. I hope you understand why I'm not doing it, and forgive me for lying. Nah, screw you guys, I can do what I want. Well, the game does still need a bit more content, and the main issue right now is just polish. There are tons of small bugs and inconveniences that just drag down the overall experience, but it can be hard to locate all these issues by myself, so I'm going to begin something that I like to call the Couch Combat World Tour. Basically, I'm going to be testing the game as often as I can, with as many people as I can, and during these tests I'm going to try to record every issue, big and small, and every bug. And then I'll try to fix every single issue on this list. Stop 1 for the Couch Combat World Tour was at a friend's house, where we played 3 players because I didn't have a USB hub, so we didn't have enough ports for 4 player, and I got some great feedback. So with all that detailed feedback, I made a long list of all the issues I found, and then I started to fix them. Polish is basically just checking off a long list of deceptively small tasks, but there were also several bigger tasks I could not tackle right away, like outlining the players and pickups to increase visibility, and fixing the outrun area's disappointing jump pads. Since the knockback for melee combat currently sends you into the stratosphere, I decided it was a good idea to just rework how knockback in general works. I used to just directly apply knockback to the rigid body with forces, which works for things like explosions, but not really for punching, so I made a new script that knockback sends the forces to, and that script applies said forces every fixed update while also dampening them towards 0. And while these forces are being applied, it also removes the friction from the player mover, which allows you to slide across the ground. I set up the system to work with punching, and finally I have good punching knockback. But the World Tour Stop 2 is coming up, so I exported the game and got it ready. This was at a different friend's house, although some of the same people that were there at the first test were here too, and I continued to get great feedback.
Where are all the couches?
And so I made a new list. There were way less issues to fix this time, but most of them were centered around one thing: the main menu. The main menu can be kinda clunky, and the drop-in menu especially needs some work. Plus, the game modes menu is completely unnecessary, as arcade is still the only game mode. I didn't get around to fixing the menu in this devlog, but that will be one of my main objectives next devlog. I made some more small adjustments to the game and added an outline shader to the gun pickups and player models. It makes them easier to see on all stages, but the shader is absolutely necessary on the outrun stages thanks to their dark colors, which make the darker player colors and guns very hard to see. But before I get to any of that, I just want to talk about how I plan on making money off the game. So I'm releasing the game for free on Steam, be sure to wishlist by the way, but how do I plan to make any money off of it since it's free? Well, first off, money is not my main objective with this game. The primary purpose of making it was for me to learn how to properly make games and to actually release a long-term project. But the secondary objective was to get as many people to play it as possible. If I release it for free on Steam, then there's a decent chance that Steam will push the game to people and I'll be able to get lots of people playing the game, which is what I really want. But to be upfront, I do plan on trying to make money off this game by using a Patreon, and that's why I'm announcing this Patreon right now. I feel like Patreons are a good model for game developers like me who make lots of smaller projects. I don't really want to restrict who can play my games that much, so instead having people who really like my games and possibly want some extra perks support me would be nice. If you support the Patreon, I plan on providing 4 main things. The main one, of course, is access to the most recent Couch Combat betas. The ones that are on itch.io right now have not been updated in a long time for several reasons, and if you join the Patreon, then I will give you access to a version that I finished just a day before releasing this video. The game isn't in a complete state, obviously it is a beta, but if you support, I'll give you access to a beta, and then you can also give me feedback and help shape the future of the game. The second benefit is that you get access to all the source code for every single game jam that I've ever done that I still have the project files for. This includes stuff like my Attack on Titan movement system and my Unity Minecraft engine. You are free to use code from these in your projects, though I would like if you credited me. The third benefit is that I plan on having exclusive events on the Patreon, with the first one being a game jam where Patreon members directly control the themes, restrictions, and twists, which I'm excited to do. Finally, you can also get a Discord role and access to exclusive channels on my server, which is cool I guess. But that's it for the Patreon. Support it if you want, but just watching this video is already pretty helpful. Now that all the main issues within the actual game were resolved, I decided it was time to finish up all the content I want for release. So far, most of the weapons in the game have been somewhat tame. The only really unique one is the grenade launcher, and the grenade launcher is by far my favorite weapon, so I'm going to try to make another interesting one. The idea is basically a super shotgun, but it has hard to control knockback on both the player shooting it and the one being shot. But you can also shotgun jump and use it for movement, although the movement is mostly horizontal. The reason I decided to make the movement mostly horizontal instead of vertical is because the grenade launcher takes health in order to provide extra movement, while a shotgun just takes ammo, so it should be a little more restricted to make the grenade launcher worth it. Anyways, I modeled, rigged, and animated a double-barreled shotgun for the game, and I also decided on a name for it, Big Bertha. I used the new knockback script that I wrote for punching to add knockback to the player whenever you fire the gun, and also to the player who's being hit by it. Knockback is fairly weak whenever you are shooting at a player or in the air, but if you hit a wall or the ground, then it will propel you further depending on how close to the thing you hit was from you. This makes a unique movement situation for the gun, where you can zoom up close and take out other players in one shot if you're good enough. A lot of sounds in the game currently need reworking, which I haven't gotten to, but I also made some shooting sounds for Big Bertha by combining various sounds from the gun sounds pack I have. And a lot of development time for this devlog was spent on stages, and I completed the western area. Now there are 24 stages in the game, 8 for each area, and I think that's plenty for a free game to launch with. From now on for stages, I'm going to be mostly focusing on polishing these stages and maybe redoing a few of the worst ones. And I also implemented several new settings because they are important for accessibility. The first one was graphic settings, which I finally got working. The game actually looks pretty good even on low, because the main thing impacted is just the shadow quality. I might have to make a lower setting though, because some people might even need post-processing turned off for it to run well. Other than that, I added a FOV slider, more audio sliders, aim assist options, and colorblind modes with the help of an open source GitHub repository. But it was time for the first leg of the Couch Combat World Tour to come to an end, so I had one final 2-player play session. The gameplay for the game itself is pretty much how I want it now. Maybe some stages and guns can use some polish, but overall everything works pretty well. The main issue is just the main menu, which is something I really need to fix, so it'll be my first priority next devlog. My game is pretty close to done. Sure, it needs some more content, and I'd like to try to get online multiplayer in it, but the actual game is basically done. But the game has an issue. It's frustrating to play, and this mostly isn't actually caused by the gameplay itself. Rather, things like the menu just don't work like you would expect. This makes the game as a whole feel buggy, unpolished, and unprofessional, and those are not exactly the 3 words I want my game described as, so I'm gonna try to fix that. Basically, I want to transform my game's feel, and for a template to try to match, I'm gonna try to make my game feel as good as Lethal League Blaze, which is a great game by the way. Starting up a local game of Lethal League is an easy and smooth experience, while Couch Combat just isn't. That unfortunately means that I'll have to work on what are definitely not my favorite parts of game development, which are UI design, bug fixing, and input management. Last devlog, I finished up a bunch of polish and playtested, but playtesting revealed even more things I have to fix, so I guess I'll do that now. First off, I updated the reload sounds for many of the guns. And then I also make it so that the Big Bertha gun does not cosplay as a pistol from third person. I also finally fixed the very depressing jump pads. To do this, I made it so that instead of adding a force to the player's rigid body whenever it touches the jump pad, it sets the rigid body's velocity, which actually works. And I also addressed the biggest issue with the game, the lack of couches. And this was actually really difficult, as I had to find a way to organically integrate couches into the gameplay and design of the game, which led me to completely starting from scratch. I added couches to like 3 stages. I also updated the weapon icons for the new gun. If anybody has been following this project's development for a decent amount of time, then you can probably recall that the game has had a lot of issues with handling input. I've switched input handlers many times. In fact, I've used an old input system, the new input system, and a third-party one called In Control, but I've had issues with all of them. But the one that seems the best is the new input system, so I'm going to go ahead and try to switch back to the new input system, which will hopefully fix a lot of issues in my game. Currently, I'm using In Control, and with In Control, it's very difficult to set up rebindings, and also has some strange issues with recognizing controllers, and sometimes even switches the orders of controllers in the game, which isn't good. So I'm going to properly switch to Unity's new input system. And there are actually a few good tutorials now over the new input system, as there weren't really many whenever I was starting out 2 years ago. So hopefully it'll be easy. It wasn't easy, but I got it done, and hopefully I won't have to do any other boring input-based things this month. Oh wait. Being able to move through menus with controllers. The thing that every single controller-based game ever has. Well, except for my game, so I guess I should get on it. Now I know that Unity has a built-in solution for controller input, but it's weird and not working for me, so instead of wrestling with bugs, I'm just going to create my own simple solution. But I did end up doing one really big thing whenever implementing controller input, and that is completely redoing the game options screen. There are a few reasons why I did this. 1, I wanted the menu to look better, and having 3D VHS models is a neat aesthetic. And 2, the new menu is just a straight line to navigate, and that is much easier for me to code. So yeah, that's the real reason I did it. And the guns also have 3D models as well, though they've been having some bugs lately. Also added a few new features to the new menu, which is the ability to select or deselect all the stages or guns at once, although it makes sure you always have at least one stage enabled at all times. Also, I added a shuffle option to the stages that allows you to shuffle them, which makes playing the game quite a bit more interesting. Setting up the main menu, pause menu, and game options menu to work with controller input took a while, but the real issue ended up being the settings menu. I messed around with it for a very long time and was pretty close to getting everything working, but then I encountered a very strange bug whenever I tried to set up transitioning from the main settings menu to the details. This bug completely froze the game for like 40 seconds every time it happened, and I couldn't figure out what was causing it, so I decided to instead just do what I did to the game options menu and redo the settings menu to make it simpler, and while I'm at it, I might as well make it look and function a bit better, but that'll have to wait until the next devlog. Although my game may still look very similar to play, if you actually sit down and try to play it now, it feels 1,000 times better than before. Here's a comparison of what navigating the menu used to look like and what it looks like now. I still have a ways to go, but the game is still making progress quickly, and I'm excited to move on to actually developing content again instead of just polishing it. Speaking of that, I am once again making a few major changes in the plan for this game. Let's be honest, I've been working on this game for 2 years, so I don't want to halfway do it. So yeah, the plan is no longer for the game to be free whenever it releases. As stated, I've spent 2 years on this, and I won't release it until I'm sure that it's 100% worth a $10 price tag. So yeah, that's how much it's gonna cost. But to make up for it, the game will be receiving more content, probably about 16 more stages in 2 areas, and several new guns and throwables as well. But the biggest thing I have planned for the game is online multiplayer. I've already tried doing that once though, so how do I expect to do it this time? Well, to be honest, I had a terrible approach to online multiplayer last time, and instead of properly learning what I was doing, I just rushed headfirst into development and got nowhere. So I'm going to try making a smaller project using online multiplayer, and try to move what I've learned onto couch combat. It might take a little bit longer, but if it actually works, it will definitely be worth it. Adding online multiplayer will probably extend development by at least a month, probably more. But as I said, I don't want to halfway finish this game. So yeah, let's get this local multiplayer game online. Finally, I've been working with a composer a little bit to get some original music made for the game. So far we don't have any tracks ready, but I'll be sure to show them off whenever they are ready, so subscribe for that. Okay, I just finished exporting all 6 versions of the game. I can't wait to put this new demo on Steam. Oh, a bug. Well, I didn't plan on finishing this game this lifetime anyways. Hi, I'm Levin, and I'm making a split-screen multiplayer FPS called Couch Combat. It's been a while since I updated the demo, and I think it's about time for an upgrade as the old demo is looking a little old. But I think it would be cool to get the demo actually on Steam instead of itch.io. And my game is very professional, so I bet they'd let me polish it on Steam no problem. Well, I guess I could polish it a bit more. Oxford Dictionary defines polish as to make the surface of something smooth and shiny by rubbing it. And I define polish is purgatory. You can always polish a game or a project more, and there is always something that can be improved. Polishing is basically just trying your absolute hardest to improve everything. And because of this, the infinite void of time occupied by polish is a very necessary but not very fun part of game development. But sometimes, this polish can save your entire indie game. No clickbait 2022 Danny Carlson gone commercial Steam indie game. Because I realized that my game was actually violating copyright laws. With the freaking text. So yeah, apparently people can not only copyright fonts, but I could also get sued if I use them in a commercial project like a certain couch-related game. So I quickly looked around online for some free for commercial use fonts, and I found one that actually looks a lot better in my current font, so I switched it out right away. So yeah, other than single-handedly saving my game from annihilation, I also finally listened to my comment section for the first time in my life, and I reduced all the ammo for all the guns in the game. This forces you to actually sometimes have to use multiple guns in a round, and also value your shots slightly more. Over the past month, I've been implementing controller movement in the menu, and it has been a surprisingly massive task, but all I've got left to do is the settings menu, which also happens to be the most complicated menu in the entire game. The settings menu has 2 lines of settings that can be toggles, drop-downs, or sliders, and might I remind you, currently the game completely freezes for about 30 seconds whenever you try to navigate this menu with a controller. So I took the logical approach and I killed the settings menu with fire. The new settings menu is clean, sleek, and simple. Well, it pretty much looks the same as the last one, but now it's only one line that doesn't have a scroll view. And ironically, with the remover of the scroll view, it's actually possible to scroll through the settings and click on them. The new settings menu is complete and looking quite drippy if I do say so myself. So all that's really left for the menus is making them look and function a bit better, so I got on that. Trust me, I hate working on these menus as much as you probably hate hearing about them at this point. But Mental Checkpoint, who is the sponsor of this video, just so happens to have controller prompts available for free on his website. So I used these and added them everywhere in the game, and they look quite nice and make it quite a bit easier to navigate on controller. In its original plan, couch combat was designed to be a meditative experience. No music, the only sounds are the calming sounds of gunfire, explosions, and hit markers. But meditation is going out of style, and I hate artistic integrity, so I'm going to try to instead find a composer to make some lo-fi beats as couch/combat to. But honestly, I doubt I'll be able to find anybody. I guess I could try posting to this subreddit, maybe I'll find somebody if I'm lucky. And wow, suddenly I'm a celebrity. But after sorting through seemingly thousands of composers who all seem to make the same dramatic orchestra music for movie trailers, I found a composer and all of the music is in the demo, and it's got a really cool mix of jazz, rock, and EDM going on. For the menu music, I took inspiration from the classic game Mario Kart Wii. In Mario Kart Wii, as you progress through the menus, the music in the background gets more instruments added to it. And in my game, there's a similar system. It starts with synths, then it adds drums, and finally guitar to the music. And as the kiddos might say, it totally bangs. But taking a step back from active development, what exactly do I have planned for the future of couch combat? Well, I'm planning on doing 3 main things before release: online multiplayer, controller rebinding, and more content. Of course, I'll do smaller things like bug fixing and more polish, but I'm not going to announce a release date until all these things are done, as I don't want to rush any of them. Basically, I'll just announce a release date, and then the last week or 2 will just be time for me to polish, test, and market the game. So far out of these 3, online development is going pretty swell. I'm using a new solution called Fishnet. Get it? Like fish networking? Like a fishnet, you use the fish, but this time net stands for network? No? You don't get it? Well, to be fair, you do need an above average IQ to understand ButWhyLevin. I'm hopeful for implementing online multiplayer into the game using Fishnet, but I also imagine that it'll take an incomprehensible amount of time to bug fix and polish, so I'm not looking forward to that. And the rebinding system should not be too hard with a new input system, and more content is what I'm most excited about. But I'll hold off details for that until later. But back to the present, which is actually the past for me because it already happened, now I'm talking about it in a devlog, time is an illusion. I had to add some small features that are necessary for any demo. I added a pop-up page within the game that shows all the controls and also will secretly serve as the base for rebinding in the future, and I also made the about page have credits and stuff, added links to all the important stuff about couch combat, and added a page that shows up that basically just tells people to join my Patreon. I also had to fix some really dumb bugs in the main menu, but I was unable to fix this one issue in the game options menu that doesn't let the 3D model show up whenever you open it during the game. This is because of camera layers and stuff, and I haven't really figured out a way to fix it yet, so I'll have to come back to it after the demo. Finally, I just locked a bunch of stages and guns out of the demo. You can still play all of the newly renamed Samurai area, but only the first level, the Outrun and Western areas are available. You'll have to wait for the full version of the game to come out for those. A little known game development fact is that the S in FPS stands for shooter, and so that actually implies that the game needs guns. I'm making a split screen FPS in Unity, and so I guess that means I need guns. I wonder where I'll get those. I'll make do. Hi and welcome to the channel. I'm making a split screen FPS called Couch Combat, and if you subscribe, that'll boost my ego, which I'm pretty sure is a good thing. Couch Combat is entirely local multiplayer, and you fight your friends in short, chaotic rounds. Anyways, I just spent the last month of my life developing online multiplayer. Plus, I made an entire devlog over it, and it seems like most of my viewers want online multiplayer. So, I decided to put it on hold indefinitely. I know that I've been ridiculously back and forth on online multiplayer, but I legitimately don't think it's even possible for me to do with the current state of the game and my current programming skills. And I absolutely hate trying to make netcode. So, instead of accidentally subjugating this project to the deep pits of development hell, I decided to move on. I'll talk more about this decision and the future of online multiplayer in the game later on in this devlog. But for now, just know that it's not my focus. And in order to move on from online multiplayer, I completely reverted the project back to around a month ago. So here I am, 1 month of development down the drain, and nothing to show for it but a few 3D models. So let's go ahead and put these models to good use and make a brand new area for the game, the fantasy area. In Couch Combat, there are a lot of small stages that you can play on. These stages are separated into areas that are themed around movie genres. Currently, the game has 3 finished areas: the Samurai area, the Outrun area, and the Western area. This new area is modeled after fantasy movies and media and will have such fantastical elements such as tree, house, and mushroom. And I'm introducing a new mechanic to the game that is exclusive to this area: elemental potions. These potions will be spawned at set locations on fantasy maps, and whenever you pick one up, it will temporarily give you a status effect based on the very real fantasy table of elements. I shamelessly stole this idea from Avatar, and there's no way for Nickelodeon to sue me, because they're too busy making the 15th CGI SpongeBob spin-off that appeals to 3-year-olds. I started out the development of the new area by just cataloging what models I had already created and putting them into a new prototyping stage. I figured this new fantasy area will require much less models than the other ones, because I can reuse old models as long as I make sure to change the materials a bit first. And this was completely wrong, and I ended up making more models for this area than any other one. In the early phases of this stage, I was still messing around with the overall look of it. I thought about having a sunset skybox, but I couldn't get it to look good. And I also tried adding clouds to make the floating islands look a bit more like floating islands, but it also didn't really look good. So I ultimately settled on making it nighttime and making the mushrooms glow. I also added some cool firefly particles to the stages, which I ended up toning down later. But now it was finally time to put together the first stage. So I did, and then I put together a second stage, and then I put together a third stage, and yeah, making stages is a super repetitive task that isn't really all that interesting to hear about from devlogs, but I'm getting seriously fast at it. I ended up making all 8 stages for the fantasy area in just over 4 days, and for context, it took me over 2 weeks to do the western area, over a month to do the outrun area, and like 6 months to do the samurai area. But that one doesn't really count because I was doing a lot of other stuff at the time. And real quick, this gets me back to dropping online multiplayer. I spent over a month on it and got nowhere, so all the progress that you see in this devlog happened about 2 weeks. So I basically have the choice to either spend all my time working on online multiplayer, which I hate doing, and ultimately releasing the game with way less content, or I could make many more areas, guns, and maybe even a new game mode and some new gimmicks, and actually enjoy development. So yeah, the choice was pretty obvious for me. But for people that have to use online multiplayer to play, I will dedicate some time to setting up Steam Remote Play. It's not perfect, but you can play online multiplayer with friends if you both have pretty good connections. And also I might try out Photon for Unity, which could be easier to use than Mir, but I have no idea. I doubt it'll make that big of a difference. Anyways, in just about 4 days, I had the entirety of the fantasy area complete. This wasn't because I rushed it though. It was just spring break and I had nothing better to do. So while this new area looks pretty nice, it's basically the same as the others so far, so it's time to seriously set it apart with a brand new mechanic. Potions. This is the first time I made a new mechanic from scratch in a very long time for couch combat, so I'm a little rusty, but I plan on going back and adding some new gimmicks to the older stages to make them more interesting as well. I think a unique melee katana weapon would be really cool for the samurai area. And the outrun area could receive a sort of kill streak mechanic. The western area just needs a lot more explosives though. The potions are spawned by cauldrons around the map. They are somewhat randomized on when they are created, but it's never too long. And while the potion is being brewed, you can see what element is going to be created next by looking at the color of the fluid and bubbles. There are 4 elemental potions and 1 special one. Each potion has a few positive effects with 1 drawback. Water makes you slide much further while playing a splashing sound, and it also makes you heal for half of the damage that you deal with your gun. I think this fits with the water theme somewhat, but it also reduces how much damage your guns deal. Earth gives you defense that decreases all damage taken, and also increases your punching damage and knockback by a lot, but it also makes you drop your gun and be completely unable to use guns until it wears off. It's a lot of fun. Fire gives your gun a fire effect, which increases its damage and makes it deal a fire debuff that causes damage over time, but having the potion also burns away your health while you have it. Finally, air makes you move faster and double jump, but increases how much damage you take. But there is one more potion. It's the combatant potion. When drinking it, you have a 50% chance to gain all the positive effects of all elements with no drawbacks, which makes you super powerful. But you also have a 50% chance of getting all the drawbacks of the elements with no positives, which is significantly less fun. But I think this adds a fun element of luck to the game that is good for party games like couch combat. When it comes to development, a lot of time is spent on polish. The UI has smooth animations and a bar at the top that indicates how much longer you have left. And it also has lots of particle effects, although I'm still working on a few of them, and a bunch of new sound effects too. In the title and beginning of this video, I was talking about all the new weapons I made, and these potions are sort of weapons, I guess. But I am also in the process of adding a ton of new guns to the game. Admittedly, I'm probably working on too many of them at once, which is sort of slowing down the whole process a bit. But it's fun, so whatever. First off, the Magic Tome of Fire. I started last devlog, and it's still pretty inconsistent with seeking and a bit unpolished. Plus, it blocks your vision. But I think it's a pretty unique weapon for an FPS that just needs a bit more polish to get right. Secondly, the bow. It's a bow, and it's also completely unfinished. It's basically just a model in Blender right now, and it'll require me adding a lot more code to my player shooting script to improve it. And by the way, the player shooting script is getting way too long now. I'm trying to separate it into smaller ones, but it takes a long time, and I don't really feel like doing that, so it'll probably just keep getting longer and longer. Next up is the Boomer, which is a 2D pixel art shotgun like Doom. I still need to make the animations for it, but it's basically done. And next is my favorite, the minigun. The minigun is an absolute beast. It takes forever to charge up and makes you walk slowly, but it shoots incredibly fast when charged up, and it doesn't have to reload. The minigun is basically done. It just needs some final polish and new sound effects. I put my game Couch Combat on Reddit, but I wasn't prepared for the response that I would get. Lately, I've been focusing on polishing up my game. The core gameplay is pretty much done, but there's still a lot in store for the game. More content, polish, and maybe even a massive new twist. But I'll talk more about that later in the video. The key to creating a good gameplay experience is having good gameplay. But it also helps if getting to this good gameplay isn't a terrible time. So over the past few devlogs, I've been focusing on improving the menus, UI, settings, and overall polish for my game. And so I just started out by implementing a few new improvements. The first one is something that I should have done a long time ago, but I made the spawn positions for each players point in a better direction. Before this change, you would often spawn staring out over the abyss, and if you had been moving around in a previous stage, you could very easily just walk off the stage as soon as you spawn. Now that's fixed. In the last devlog, I added a ton of guns to the game. We're talking miniguns, magic guns, guns that aren't guns at all but are actually a bow and arrow, and guns that tell you to wishlist my game on Steam. But back on topic, I added support for the new guns to actually be used in the game. In order to do this, I had to overhaul the game options menu to allow there to be multiple pages of guns. And while I was at it, I also fixed some issues with saving and loading between stages in the settings menu. And I also finally fixed the stupid bug where your audio levels would be reset every stage, which basically made it impossible to actually mute the game. But anyways, after this, I added transitions to couch combat. Instead of just cutting to the next scene and looking bad, I now have a couch silhouette that zooms in and then back out to where the new stage is loaded. This is managed by just having a new UI object that is always sent to the back of its parentage, so it can always be on top. And after adding this transition, I figured that I would go a step further and add a countdown to the beginning of each stage. To do this, I simply paused all input from every player at the beginning of each stage, played a little UI animation and some sounds, and then unpaused it. This initially led to a bug where the last frame of input from the previous game would carry over and stay for the whole countdown, which normally just led to you falling off a cliff at the very beginning of the game. So I fixed this by just setting all input to 0 whenever it pauses the input for the countdown, and that fixed it pretty well. Last devlog, I talked about adding new gimmicks to each area of my game. Basically, I want to make each area feel a bit more unique than the other ones, so I'm adding new objects and mechanics to the areas. I started by adding potions to the fantasy area last devlog, and so I started to make the second gimmick, a unique katana weapon which will sometimes spawn in the samurai area. The katana will spawn on a stand, which will always be in the same place in the samurai area, but the katana will not always spawn on the stage. If you pick up this katana, it'll allow you to perform a dash attack similar to Genji from Overwatch or the Mercenary from Risk of Rain 2. And I modeled, rigged, and animated this katana in Blender. It's a bit different than the other weapons as it has 2 attack animations and no reload animation. And I started importing it into the game as well, but I put it on the back burner for the rest of the week. Last devlog, I held a poll on my Discord server to let you guys decide what I should add to the game, and out of these options, you guys picked for me to finish out the Boomer Shotgun, so I did just that. The Boomer Shotgun is inspired by classic shooters like Doom, and it also gets its name from the fact that these games are called Boomer shooters. The Boomer is a 2D pixel art gun that works in a 3D world. Before this devlog, I had built the basis for it, but during this devlog, I really made it into a finished gun. I completed all the animations and got the gun to not clip for outlines, and I also made some sound effects using a combination of BFXR, which is a free program that generates retro sound effects, and also I use various gun sounds that I have in a pack, compressed and bass boost them in Audacity, and then I put them into an online bit crusher to get that retro sound. And I also use a voxel editor to make a 3D model for the pickup of the Boomer. The Boomer is really fun to use, and it also boosts your movement speed a bit, which is supposed to emulate the speedy movement seen in games like Quake and Doom. So I think my game is currently in a good position whenever it comes to polish, so I kind of want to try something out. There's a subreddit called r/destroymygame. Basically, you post a video of your game, and then people give you really brutal criticism. So I'm going to put couch combat on there. What's the worst that could happen? I can't believe it. These terrible people, they gave me harsh but constructive feedback on my game. How dare they? Reddit truly is filled with horrible people. The best way to beat them is to implement their suggestions and improve my game. That'll teach them. First off, most people complained about the stretched perspective whenever playing in 2-player mode, and personally I don't have an issue with it, but that's why you ask for feedback. So I'm going to add a setting that'll make it a bit smaller, but it'll have normal aspect ratios. A lot of people also mentioned that the game is lacking in screen shake and punch, so I'll add more screen shake and try to improve the sound effects as well. And people also mentioned that 1v1 is kinda boring in the game, which I had to begrudgingly agree with. The game, like many other local multiplayer games, really does better with the chaos and slightly longer rounds that 4-player split screen brings. I'm not certain what the solution to this is at the moment. And finally, some people mention that the text at the end of each round is really goofy and fun, but there isn't really much other humor like that in the game. So I'm planning on interjecting more of that into the game. But the biggest and most common piece of feedback that I received was that the game was just kinda basic. It just lacked a big twist or core gameplay feature to really set it apart from other shooters, split screen or otherwise. And honestly, I totally agree with this, and it's been on my mind for quite a while, as evidenced by this creatively named task on Trello called Need a Hook for the Game, which I made over a month before posting on Reddit. I need something that will not only set the game apart, but also provide better flow to individual rounds. I've thrown around a few ideas for what this could be, ranging from upgrades like in the game rounds, or some sort of long-term gameplay that ties it all together, kinda like a Mario Party board, or even just modifiers that change up things between rounds. And now, I really like the idea of modifiers, and I totally plan on adding a bunch, but I don't think that's enough to set the game apart, so solving this is my #1 task right now. I am open to any suggestions in the comments, but next devlog is going to be all about this twist, because I need to come up with what it should be and then get to planning and doing it as soon as possible. So to finish this whole Reddit thing off, I'm going to post my game again, after making all the changes I've listed here, and I will absolutely crush those haters by listening to their feedback and making changes to my game. Yeah, that'll show them. I've been developing this game for 2 years. It's called Couch Combat and it is a split-screen multiplayer FPS. But not too long ago, I was informed that it was a little bit too basic. My game was just a split-screen FPS with fast-paced rounds and a low-poly art style. And while there really aren't many other split-screen games for PC out there that reach the same niche as mine, my game doesn't really have enough unique about it to grab the attention of people. Plus, it can get a little bit stale whenever you play it for a while, as the short rounds begin to get repetitive. So that's why I need a twist. In this case, the twist is a simple, marketable addition or change to the game that enhances it. I would also like for that twist to make the game more replayable and unique. These are big goals for one single feature, so I spent a long time brainstorming trying to get it right. But after a little while, I had my idea for the twist firmly in place. I'm a huge fan of Risk of Rain 2, and it might just be my second favorite game ever, right under Amori My Beloved. The game is a roguelike, and so RNG plays a big part in how each run progresses. But the game is balanced so incredibly well that it almost never feels like you're getting screwed over by luck, unlike other roguelikes. But the main thing that I want to glean from Risk of Rain 2's design is how the game becomes more and more chaotic as it goes on. The insane combination of items and crazy amount of enemies and projectiles makes the game chaotic in a fun way that'll probably result in you getting one shot in the back of the head 4 hours into a run, but is also quite a bit of fun. So, here's how I'm going to apply this to my game with a new twist I've created: modifiers. Now, modifiers and mutators aren't a new idea by any means. They can be found in everything from Streets of Rogue to Halo, but I think I have a unique way of mixing these modifiers with a bit of RNG to create controlled chaos. At the end of each round, players will be allowed to vote on a choice between 2 random modifiers, and whichever one of these wins the vote is added to the next stage. But older modifiers stay and stack, so as you play rounds, more and more modifiers are added, adding more and more chaos to their game as it goes on. Then, every 10 rounds or so, a random, bigger modifier is added to the game. Most modifiers do something relatively small, like adding low gravity or a new small mechanic to the game. But this big modifier is designed to completely change the way that the game works for one round. Then after this round with the big modifier ends, all the modifiers, including the big one, are removed and you start over with no modifiers. I think that this system will increase the flow between rounds by adding more uniqueness to each one, as well as adding a big 10th round to look forward to. Plus, this allows me to implement community ideas for modifiers, which is always fun. But the best way for me to see if the system is any good is for me to actually make it and then playtest. So that's what I'm going to do in this devlog. But first, if you like the game and want to support the channel, then the best way that you can do that is just to wishlist it on Steam. There's also a free demo on Steam, and you can try it out if you want to. Wishlisting the game is incredibly helpful, as having more wishlists on release makes Steam push my game in the algorithm, which is incredibly helpful for an indie dev like me with no marketing budget. For the new modifier system, I decided to split the game into 2 modes, Classic Mode and Arcade Mode. Arcade Mode is going to be the version of the game that exists now, where you get complete control over what stages and guns spawn. Classic Mode will not let you pick that stuff, but will have the modifier choice system that I talked about just a second ago. The reason that I'm not letting the player change game options directly in Classic Mode is just because I want to be able to make modifiers that change these game options. That way I can do things like having a modifier that makes only pistols spawn. Let me know in the comments if you think this is a good idea, because I'm not 100% sure texture on it yet. And also after I finish classic mode, arcade mode will get modifiers added as well, but you'll be able to directly choose which ones you want, just like guns and stages. Splitting the game into 2 different modes just required me to make some improvements to the main menu with a new placeholder screen. I plan on overhauling a lot of things in the main menu soon, so this will eventually look better, but for now there's a button for arcade mode and also one for classic mode. Modifiers were also a fairly simple system to make in code. There's just a new game object that persists between scenes that has a script for managing modifiers on it. These modifiers are represented with a custom class and an array that has a few simple attributes. Scripts like player movement will get references to the script and then be able to change things based on which modifiers are enabled. This system is fairly simple and easy to extend, so I made a few of the first modifiers to test it out. The first 2 modifiers were basic, just one that doubled health and one that made the game feel like it was low gravity by adding a slight upwards force to the player's rigid body. But then I took a break to work on some other parts of the game. Last devlog, I began development on a katana, and so I finished it up. I had to create a new script for melee weapons, but now I can add more melee weapons to the game in the future much more easily, so I might just do that sometime. And I also gave the katana a dash. The dash disables the player's rigid body and then moves it straight forwards, while also collision checking for terrain. This allows it to go through players but not through terrain, although it can still clip through it sometimes, so it needs a bit more work. Other than that, I just added a bunch of polish and particles to the katana. It still needs sounds, but is overall very nice. The katana only spawns in the samurai area on these katana stands, and I think that it adds a lot of uniqueness to the samurai area. At this time, I also made a few more of the improvements that were requested by people in the Reddit thread from the last video. A few of the main changes that I made were first of all slightly turning up screen shake. Not too much, but the guns are quite a bit more satisfying to use now. I also fixed things like a huge glitch in the drop-in menu that made it nearly impossible to have more than 2 controllers connected, and I also fixed the settings menu by making it actually save correctly, and I also happened to mostly fix the long-standing issue of guns falling through the stage. To do this, I just added friction to the physics material of the stage, because apparently not having it messes up collisions in Unity, and this made collisions much more consistent for the pickups, which was quite a relief. I've added potions to the fantasy area and a katana to the samurai area, so the next area on my list to improve was the outrun area. The outrun area will be receiving a variety of improvements, as it is probably the worst area from a gameplay perspective. I'm gonna add a new gimmick in the future, but right now I'm just implementing a smaller feature to set it apart. Randomized stages. Well, actually, it's just a few parts of the stage that have a chance to spawn. Basically, it's possible for a few extra islands to spawn, plus stuff like a jump pad. This makes the stages more replayable and unique, and I really like it. I also updated the wall running controls, and now they are more in line with games like Titanfall and overall just less janky. Overall, for the outrun area, I still have quite a bit more to do, and in the future I'll be totally redoing 2 terrible stages, and also adding a big new gimmick to it. And hopefully that'll just make it a lot better overall to play. Getting back to working on classic mode, I made a modifier menu that shows up in between rounds. It's very basic looking and somewhat placeholder now, but you can choose between 2 modifiers that are randomly selected. If there's a tie in the vote, then whichever modifier was chosen by the player who won the last round is picked. So now that menu's done, there's just one last thing for me to complete in this devlog. But this final item was by far the most time consuming one I had to do, making modifiers. I made 10 in total, which is just barely enough to be able to test out the system in-game. I planned all these modifiers out in Milanote beforehand, and also have a bunch more planned for the future. But if you want to suggest more modifiers, feel free to comment them on this video, or even better, join my Discord server with a link in the description and suggest them there. A few of the simpler modifiers I've already made are calcium, which doubles everybody's health, low gravity, canned jump, which adds a double jump which stacks with the air potion in the fantasy area, Big Boom, which is inspired by Halo and makes explosions knock you back 3 times further, but doesn't actually increase damage from them. Rubber Bullets, which makes all guns deal less damage, but instead do knockback. This knockback increases more for how much damage the gun would usually do. Another modifier I made is Teleports Behind You, which just makes everybody spawn with katanas. And Gun Drought, where less guns spawn. But I also made a few more complicated modifiers. The first one was Personal Bubble, and this makes it so that if 2 players touch, they both die in an explosion. And the final 2 modifiers I made are Belated Self-Defense, which makes players drop a bunch of grenades on death that explode one after another, and also Pinata Party, which makes players drop candy that behaves like potions in the fantasy area and heal for 20 HP each. Pinata Party also plays a party streamer sound and confetti like Grunt Birthday Party from Halo. Keep in mind that all these modifiers can mix together, so you can have players spawning candy on def, but also spawning grenades which launch that candy all over the place. And stacking low gravity, can jump, and the air potion in the fancy area leads to absolutely insane mobility. I also made these modifiers reset every 10 rounds, so what's next for modifiers? Well, I'm going to start by adding big modifiers to the game. I also need some sort of UI to show which modifiers are enabled, as well as actual non-stock image icons for the modifiers, but I think there's a lot of potential for this system. Plus, you can still play the game without it in arcade mode, so hopefully this pleases everybody and makes the game better. Couch combat is getting super close to release, and now that school is almost out for me, I can focus more on it. After classic mode, I basically just plan on polishing the menus, improving the Steam page, bug fixing, and adding stuff like controller rebinding to the game, and then it's basically done. There are around 30 games released on Steam every day, and if you look at the new tab on Steam, you get a chance to see these games before most of them slip into obscurity. While it's obvious why some of these games do poorly, as there are about 1 million bad RPG Maker games, asset flips, and default Unity rolling ball tutorial variants, there are some perfectly fine games that obviously had a lot of effort put into them. So how do you stand out among all these other games? And is it even possible to be successful on Steam nowadays with all these other games coming out constantly? Well, in actuality, the stats are looking pretty good for new games coming out. There was an 18% increase in games making over $10,000 in their first week from 2018 to 2019 according to Valve. However, that still only leaves about 10% of games making $10,000 out of all the new games that are released every year. So how do you increase your chances of getting into that 10%? That question is not an easy one, and you can argue that it is the main objective of literally every aspect of game development to get into that successful percentile. But in this video, I'm going to be focusing on how I differentiated my game from others on Steam. There are a lot of decent but bland games out there, so I'm trying to find something that'll set my game apart from others. And I decided that thing would be a new twist that I put on my game. Coming up with this twist was a process that I detailed in the last 2 devlogs, so you can watch those if you want a bit more info on how I came up with it. But basically, the twist that I chose was a combination of various ideas from different games that I used to create something unique for my game. I took Risk of Rain 2's stacking levels of chaos, modifiers from other party games, and interludes between rounds that allow player choice to determine how the game plays out, like in the game rounds. What I ended up with is a stacking modifier system where you slowly add more and more chaos with each round, and every 10 rounds or so, you have a final round with a unique, larger modifier that completely switches up how the game plays. In my opinion, this is a pretty marketable twist that adds a lot of personality to the game, and also makes playing the game with only 2 players a lot more interesting, and makes rounds flow more smoothly together. Finally, it allows me to come up with new modifier ideas, and also source ideas from the community. During the development time for this devlog, I mostly focused on completing the modifier system, or at least getting pretty close to. The big thing that I needed to do was adding final rounds to the game. These are unique modifiers that are only enabled for 1 round, and then after this round, all modifiers are reset. I made 3 variants of these final rounds. I plan on making a lot more in the future, but 3 is good for now. And also I plan on calling these rounds ridiculous rounds because, alliteration. The first one was actually suggested by a viewer, Yasin No Name. It's called Cushion Bombing, and in it, explosive couches rain from the sky. You have to move fast and hide under cover to avoid the explosions. And I also discovered during playtesting that it's a strategy to get above where the couches spawn and avoid them that way, which I'm leaving in because it's fun. The second final round is more than a little bit inspired by the game's screen sheet. Everyone is invisible and you have to screen sheet to know where the other players are. The only difference between the implementation in my game and the original in screen sheet is that you can still see the hats in my game, which was originally a bug, but without it this round is nearly impossible, as couch combat has much faster movement and longer times to skill than screen sheet does, so it's really difficult to kill the other players. As for the whole copying thing, I don't believe it's a huge deal, as games steal ideas from each other all the time. Think about the amount of games that have copied the golden gun from GoldenEye 007. I'm not going to claim to have come up with this idea originally, and I might try to credit screen sheet within the game, but I do not think it's necessary for me to remove this round just because it's very indirectly inspired from a different game, as removing this feature would basically just make the game worse, as it would remove a fun round that was really enjoyable in playtesting, so I'm just going to leave it in the game as I really like it. And yeah, that's how I'm justifying it, and also how I sleep at night. The third and final mode that I completed for now is global warming. It's pretty simple actually. Lava rises up from below and touching it deals damage and knocks you upwards, similar to how Mario Galaxy does lava. I should probably improve the looks of the lava eventually, but I'm terrible at shaders. I also made a bunch of new modifiers and completed some other tasks that I had to do to get modifiers to be an actually working system. First off, I modeled some icons in Blender and put them together in Photoshop, so I no longer use stock images for the modifiers, and I also set up a little display menu thing that shows shows which modifiers are enabled at the time, and you can also see it on the pause menu. And while I got to making tons of new modifiers, I still have quite a few more planned, which I'll complete in the next devlog. But for now, I added trigger finger and careful shot. Trigger finger increases fire rate, but also increases spread. Careful shot, on the other hand, is the exact opposite, as it increases damage and decreases spread, but also decreases fire rate. These are pretty simple modifiers, which I needed a few more of, and I like how the icons turned out. The next modifier I made was glue stick, which makes you wall run on everything. This is one of my favorites, and it adds even more chaotic movement to later rounds when you can stack this with other modifiers like low gravity, canned jump, and other movement modifiers. And the other new modifier I made was bucket o' bullets, which gives you infinite ammo for all weapons. This is a lot of fun with guns like the minigun. I also polished up the modifier menu. Now it uses a blurred background instead of the black one, which looks a lot better. The only things left for classic mode are just making more modifiers, and also polishing things like the ridiculous rounds, which currently don't feel like a big deal. So I'm going to add to them and make them feel a lot more final. The other thing that a lot of my time was dedicated to was bug fixing. I've still got a ton to do before I can release this game, so I've been going back and fixing tons of things that I've been putting off. It's a long list, but a few of the things I've done are fixing the drop-in and customization menus by completely rewriting the script, during which I managed to turn around 600 lines of terrible spaghetti code into just over 300 lines of well-commented code that actually works now. I also rewrote the scorekeeper script. The scorekeeper does a bunch of stuff, as it also manages transitions and stages and game options, and by rewriting it, I was able to make the game finally count kills correctly, as before it would just do random numbers sometimes. I also added headshots back in the game, which is fun, and so now I'm working on adding more settings and fixing the ones I have because they are still a little janky. Finally, I'm working on adding Steam achievements to the game, and as a reward for these achievements, you'll unlock new hats. I think this adds to the fun of customization, because currently you just have a bunch of hats which you start with, which really isn't that interesting. If you slowly earn them, I think they'll be a lot more fun. Also, since I'm gearing up for release, I'm starting the Couch Combat World Tour 2. If you weren't around for the original one or just don't remember it, it's basically just me going around and forcing my friends to playtest my game with me. I've already had 2 stops with different people, and each time I found tons of new bugs and improvements to make. Yay. But playtesting in classic mode also showed me that the game has gotten quite a bit more fun since adding modifiers. It feels a lot more chaotic and creates a lot more unique and goofy moments in the game, which is basically what I wanted whenever I started making the system. So thanks again to the people on r/destroymygame for basically being honest and pointing out exactly what my game lacked. I think that I've already made a lot of progress in ensuring that my game is actually fun thanks to their feedback. I'm hoping that adding this twist will increase my chances of doing well in the Steam algorithm. Although there's no way to know for sure, I think it'll help. Unity has a bit of a stigma surrounding it. Too often does a splash screen precede a low-quality asset flip or a joke game. The default Unity skybox is crowned as some of the most scuffed game projects ever seen by human eyes.
What's going on in there?
Yeah, it's a chicken roaster sign.
But this stigma isn't really Unity's fault. It's an engine that's so accessible and user-friendly that anybody can use it. But since anybody can use it, some users make things that just aren't pretty to look at. Personally, I have no qualm with these people making games like these. Most of them are just learning or goofing around. But people on Steam aren't so kind, and if they see a game that is obviously made in Unity, they will probably perceive it as amateur. I want to avoid this unfortunate reality of my game Couch Combat. So in this devlog, I'm going to be talking about how I plan on making my game look professional. Well, on second thought, maybe professional isn't the best description. So, Steam is about to hold the Steam Next Fest, and I'm signed up. Steam Next Fest is basically an event where Steam puts a big button on the main page for a week that takes you to a bunch of demos for games if you click on it. My game is a local multiplayer FPS, and it has unique modifiers that stack up as rounds progress. Local multiplayer games aren't that well geared towards demos as you need 2 people to play it, but I've heard that Steam events are actually one of the best ways to get sales in the future and also get people looking at your game. So I'm going to give it a try. Basically, I have to get my game into a good state and make a demo out of it that is good enough to get people to stay for a bit and wishlist the game. Currently, my game is a bit all over the place, and that's mostly because I introduced a huge new addition to the game a few months ago. This change was the addition of a bunch of modifiers that spice up gameplay, alongside a new mode called Classic Mode, in which the modifiers stack over round to create evolving, chaotic gameplay. I've made most of the content and system for these modifiers, but I need to integrate them better into the game, so that's what I'll focus on now. The old game mode from before modifiers, which is now called arcade mode, has a menu that lets you pick options on which stages you play on and which guns spawn. So I decided to let you also choose which modifiers you have enabled in arcade mode. So now in arcade mode, you can stack exactly what modifiers you like if you want to. I also took this time to fix bugs in the game options menu. After this, the majority of the rest of the stuff that I focused on before releasing the demo were bug fixes and other little bits of polish, and I also added sound and more animation to all of the UI in the game. I also added a few new settings like the option to invert the Y-axis on any player. Finally, I put together an updated Steam page, trailer, and cover for the game that shows off all the improvements and content that I've added to Couch Combat. And once Steam Next Fest rolled around, I sat back and waited for the wishlist to come flooding in. Just kidding, I actually got mixed up, and I thought that the festival started on June 14th, when it actually started on the 13th at noon. So I've ended up scrambling to finish a trailer and get out a demo for the game, and ended up being a bit late for the first day. But I still ended up okay, and surprisingly, my game did more than okay. I've had thousands of people download the demo and hundreds of daily active players since the festival started. Although my average time played is really bad, I think that is partially because my game requires 2 players, and so lots of people download the demo and then just leave after getting to the drop-in screen and realizing that they need a controller. And, you know, friends. All these new demo plays resulted in hundreds of more wishlists for me, which is fantastic. Although I'm definitely not one of the top performing games at this event, I've still benefited greatly from it, and it's really cool of Steam to host it. But back to development, what about new modifiers? Well, ever since I introduced the modifier system 2 devlogs ago, I've been working on expanding on it and adding lots of new modifiers. And in the time for this devlog, I nearly doubled the amount of modifiers in the game. So here they are. First off are a few simpler ones, like encouraging poster, which makes you run faster, and health redistribution, which gives everybody 50% health steal. And another one of my favorite modifiers that I made takes influences from some memes by greatly improving the lacking UI of the game. It's called Gamer UI and is pretty annoying, but it also is still my favorite, so it stayed in the game. Other modifiers are Spicy Bullets, which makes bullets explosive, Cloning Machine, which is probably the most complicated modifier to make so far, but it makes you dual wield all guns and also gives you an extra set of arms. And the last 2 normal modifiers I made were Broken Stopwatch, which was actually suggested by a viewer. Zyder Zart, or however you pronounce it, suggested making a modifier that randomly changes the timescale. So I made a modifier called Broken Stopwatch that changes the timescale every round, and also has a little UI thing that tells you the scale at the beginning of each stage. And I also made a new ridiculous round modifier called Basically Flying. You get 10 double jumps. It's really simple, but it adds a ridiculous amount of vertical movement to the round. The other big thing I did with modifiers was adding a ton of them to control game options. These modifiers are only in classic mode because you can just directly edit game options in arcade mode. But basically, they do stuff like make only grenade launchers spawn or only western stages and stuff like that. These modifiers are simple but change up the gameplay a lot for rounds, as you are no longer playing with all the guns and stages the entire time. So I think they were worth adding. If you have any ideas for clever combinations of guns or stages for modifiers to enable or disable, then feel free to comment those ideas down below. In fact, keep commenting your ideas for modifiers in general, as I'm kind of running low on ideas myself and I want to get a few more in for the game before launch. But it's time to finally address my solution to what this video is about, the Unity Curse. What is my plan for making Steam users not associate my game with the Asset Flips and Pokemon Brilliant Diamonds of the world? Well, I decided to look at the obvious place, Unity games that are actually good. There's a ton of them out there, and the main aspects that they share are that they are polished, full experiences that have unique ideas and enjoyable, deep gameplay. But much more importantly, they don't have that stupid made of Unity screen before them. Thank you to my Patreons who are all delectable little fellows, and good night. In this video, I'm going to be finishing what I started in that strangely edited devlog 2 years ago. This is the final devlog for Couch Combat, and the game is coming out in just around a week, on July 12th. It'll be $10 on Steam, and it'll be available for PC, Mac, and Linux. On to what I've been doing for these last few weeks. I'm trying to tie everything completely together into a finished product for Steam, and so that means revisiting old systems and things to try to get everything up to the same level of completeness. So I went back to the old rules menu, which I completely forgot about. If you also forgot about the rules menu, and I wouldn't blame you, it basically just lets you choose some more settings for arcade mode before you start playing. For instance, you can choose if you want to play infinite rounds, or a set number of rounds, or if you want the game to end after somebody hits a certain amount of wins. These settings all function, so I just went back and updated the UI and added a few more quality of life features to it, and also gave it a visual overhaul to match the rest of the menus. Finally, I added in the functionality for options in the classic game mode. In the classic game mode, you go for loops where you select modifiers that are stacked onto the game, and then eventually these modifiers are reset. The only option that I ended up coming up with for classic mode was letting you choose how many rounds are in between each reset. The rules menu is not a super interesting part of development, but it is still an important part of making the game work at parties and letting you play it the way you want to. So I'm glad that it's back to not completely sucking. The settings menu has been pretty glitchy for a while, so I've just started on fixing some of those glitches. For instance, I made it easier to click some of the buttons that sometimes would be like weird of colliders, and I also made it so you consistently go up and down at a slower speed instead of it kind of being random. That way it's way easier to navigate the settings menu. If anybody has any ideas for settings that I should add to the game, then please comment them down below or in the Discord server, as I need to know which settings are needed before I release the game. As usual, 90% of my time went to the smallest things. These things seem like they would take 10 seconds to implement, but usually end up taking way longer. For example, I've decided to add a screen that says clearing modifiers when modifiers are cleared, as this wasn't very clear. Get it? In order to do that, I had to update several animations and also change several parts of the script that manages moving in between scenes, and I also had to actually make the clear screen work. It wasn't fun and it ended up taking a lot of time and bug fixing, but if you multiply that process times 1000, you have software development in a nutshell. Another thing that I decided to implement after going through playtesting several times was adding some exclamations into the game. And I started this by making a pop-up that plays at the beginning of the round the first time that you go to an area. This exclamation just gives a basic overview of the unique mechanics of the area. But the bigger thing that I'm still working on as of this devlog is a how to play screen, where you can review these tips as well as read about controls, the game loop, modifiers, and other stuff. Obviously, a normal linear tutorial does not fit my game well, and so I think that this method of teaching should be helpful to those who need it, and out of the way for everybody who doesn't need it, or for everybody who just prefers to do things incorrectly forever, rather than sit through 10 seconds of exclamation, like me. The art style of the game has not changed very much since I finalized it way back in devlogs 15 and 16. There are very few textures in the game, and instead I just stuck with flat colored, low poly models. It's not incredible, but it is easy on performance, fast to make, and it still looks pretty nice. But I figured that I'd make one tweak to it before releasing the game. In recent thumbnails, I've added eyes to the characters to make them more expressive, so I figured that I would add these eyes in-game as well. So I made some expressions in Photoshop, 4 different neutral faces, a happy face, and a dead face. When you drop in on a player, they are assigned a random one of the 4 neutral faces. This makes them all stand apart more, and the other faces happen in response to events in the game. The happy one in particular plays whenever you get a kill, while the hurt one plays whenever you get hurt, and the dead one is on ragdolls. The ways that these faces work is pretty simple. I just make them a transparent material for a plane that goes over the player's face and is shaped like their face. Here the faces are in action. They even blink. Another fun change that I made was adding a bunch of random things to the menu. And I mean literally random things. When you boot up the game, there are several objects that have a random chance of spawning in the main menu. This adds to the overall goofiness of the game, as the menu was feeling pretty sterile compared to the rest of the game. Some of the things that can spawn are props from different stages, characters doing different animations, and other stuff like that. And the animations for the characters are all straight from Mixamo, by the way, as I'm pretty lazy. The gunplay currently relies very heavily on aim assist, and so there is very little actual aiming on controller. This is especially annoying when you get aim locked on something that you don't actually want to be aiming at. So I made a few slight adjustments. First off, I turned down the strength of aim assist by default, but I made the hitboxes bigger. They're still not huge, but you can now miss just a bit and still deal damage. I think giving the player a little bit more of a margin of error instead of aim locking them onto other players is better, and so I think this improves it a little bit. I also made aim assist be half strength whenever you aren't changing where you're looking, which just makes it a little bit less noticeable whenever you aren't really using it. And I think that all these tweaks should improve the gunplay a bit. In my opinion, it's very hard to make any FPS feel good on controller, as they really don't work well, but I'm still trying my hardest to make my game feel good with controller. Finally, I decided that the game needed just one more gun to round everything out. I added a burst rifle to the game a long time ago, but I wasn't happy with its feel or animations at all, so I removed it back then. I'm bringing it back, but rebuilt from the ground up. The gun is modeled after an M16, as I already have an AK in the game. But I'm going to refrain from actually calling it an M16, as I think that it's probably copyrighted or something. And here's the final gun. I quite like the feel and the animations and sound of it. It's fairly standard, but it suits its role and it helps fill out the list of guns. out. With the release of this devlog, I basically have nothing else left to do for the game other than bug fix and add rebinding, but I'm waiting a while to release it in order to have time to do other things. I need to further update the Steam page and get a final Steam build working and tested. I'm also going to do a lot more playtesting with this final version of the game, and I'll also make a new trailer. Overall, I just want to make sure that I have a polished final product on release. Another thing that I did was commission an artist to make an artwork for the cover of the game on Steam. The artist's name is Orange Capybara, and I'm really happy with how it ended up. You can check him out in the description. Will people actually buy this is the question that almost every indie game developer asks themselves over and over again. This is because it's impossible to know this answer before you release your game. You can have all the wishlist, coverage, and promising numbers possible before launch, but you really don't know until you actually hit that release button if your game is going to sell. And I think it's about time that I did that. It's been well over 2 years since I started making Couch Combat, and I'm finally about to get the answer to the essential question of will this sell? I have 1 week left to complete my game, so I'll give everybody a few seconds to guess what I spent most of my time doing in this devlog. 3, 2, okay, you already know it's bug fixing. It's always bug fixing. I actually just got done with some playtesting with friends, and unfortunately the game doesn't work. Like, at all. So I got on that. It turns out that all these issues just came down to a single missed capitalization and another single line of code. I like it when solutions are simple, but it is a bit infuriating how long it took me to find these tiny issues, as well as the massive game-breaking effects that these tiny issues had. Oh yeah, and if you want to get my game, you can go on Steam and buy it now. It's available and it means a lot if you buy it. Also, it'd be super helpful if after you buy it, you could give me an honest review. You obviously don't have to, and I don't really want anybody to lie about the game, but it really helps the Steam algorithm if I have some reviews to start with. Wednesday. And today also mostly came down to several hours of bug fixing. This time, instead of single-handedly saving my game from absolute destruction, I had to slowly fix some issues in the menus of the game. For whatever reason, the UI seems to break more than anything else in this game, but still it wasn't too hard to fix. And after fixing all those menu issues, I decided to implement a few quality of life improvements to the menus. When you scroll through the menus with a gamepad, it can be a bit too fast, so I set up a system to slow it down. And I also did the same with slowing down sliders in the settings menu to allow you to select more precisely. Thursday. I really didn't have any time to work on Thursday, so let's move on to Friday. I figured that I would use this day to polish up all the content in the game. Mostly the guns, as a lot of them still have issues. I added a burst rifle in the last devlog, and so far it's been pretty great to use. It's fun and generally works, but its reload isn't quite done, so I'll get on that. It turns out that I was accidentally using the wrong animation file for the reload, and switching it out made it work, so the burst rifle was officially finished. The other gun that was just not finished before now is the Tome of Fire. The Tome of Fire shoots flaming fireballs quickly, and I started on it forever ago, but I never quite got the seeking code to work for the bullets. So I just redid the behavior of the bullet, and now it just automatically seeks other players whenever it gets close to them. Essentially, it's just exceptionally powerful aim assist. To make the Tome of Fire balanced though, it has by far the worst damage of any gun, which leads to some interesting gunfights, as the Tome of Fire player gets to focus on dodging and running around without aiming, while the other player has to quickly kill them to avoid dying. I finished by adding the Tome of Fire to the game options menu and also finally making some sounds for it. Saturday. At this point, I had a pretty good rough draft for the final version of the game, so I decided to do some more playtesting. And while I was at it, I temporarily disabled some of the UI and used the non-stretching aspect ratio. That way I could use this gameplay footage in the final trailer, and for some reason not having the UI makes the trailer look better. Luckily for me, all the bugs seemed to be fixed and I was able to play tons of rounds. So after this playtesting, I moved back to the Steam page, which just needed a few final touches. First off, I made a new icon by actually just taking the faces that I made for the players and slapping them on a blue square for a background. I also had to resize the key art for the game about 1,000,000 times for all the different Steam things. The vertical ones in particular were tricky to get right. Now that I have all that footage from the last playtest, I'm gonna put it together in the final trailer. It'll probably take all day, but I'm actually looking forward to doing it as making trailers is pretty fun. I just started off by selecting a song and I decided to do the classic strategy of just using some public domain classical music. It's free, kind of funny, and it's easy to sync the gameplay to. So I then just planned out the general flow of the video with text. Next, I started taking some of the new footage I would need in addition to the gameplay. Since this is a 4-player game, and I'm taking all the footage as just 1 player, I had to use some sketchy methods to get some of this footage. For example, there's a quick cut at the beginning of the trailer where there's some text in the middle, as well as a bunch of players running towards the middle of a map. In order to make this, I just angled all the player spawns towards the middle and then temporarily hard-coded it so that all players constantly move forwards. And overall, I think I'm getting a bit better at trailer editing. And while my final trailer here isn't super professional, it still looks pretty good, and I think that it gives a good impression for the game. Monday. So I release the game tomorrow. I've been playtesting it basically every day, and there is essentially nothing left for me to fix. So I figured that I would instead change something that's bothering me. The third page of modifiers in the game options menu is not filled. This is an absolute crime against humanity. And I have some pretty good modifier ideas, many sourced from my audience, so I'll add 3 to fill it out. The first one was suggested by Bingus on YouTube. It's called Magnet, and it reverses all the knockback from sources like punching, guns, and explosions. It's very interesting, especially with modifiers like rubber bullets, which makes all the guns pull players towards them whenever you shoot them. Next up was In Vulcan on YouTube, as well as a similar suggestion from Green Fox on my Discord, and it was to make all guns insta-gib. Now, that is a good idea. I need some more senseless violence in my game, but I figured instead of making every bullet insta-gib, that I would make this only work with headshots, similar to games like Rainbow Six Siege. So now hitting any headshot with any weapon will instantly kill them, which is a lot easier when the big heads modifier is enabled. And finally, Hot Turnips, a very interesting individual on my Discord server, suggested this. Now, for some reason, I decided to change his name to Really Big Maracas. I don't remember why I did this, but now whenever any player dies and you have this modifier, all the other players are launched into the air. All these modifiers were pretty simple to implement, and I was sure to playtest after adding them to make sure they didn't ruin my game the day before release. But everything was fine. Tuesday. I was supposed to release the game today, but I made a really dumb mistake. I didn't submit my final build for review to Steam until last night. So now I'm stuck waiting for them to review the game and let me release it. And I was stuck waiting all day. This was kind of a bad deal, as I said in the last video and on Twitter that I would release the game on the 12th and I just didn't. So sorry about that. Wednesday. I woke up Wednesday and saw that I could release my game, so I did. I pressed all the fancy buttons on Steam to release my game, and it's out. So, check it out if you're interested. I've been spending my time recently trying to market the game, and making a press kit and putting it on Reddit, and I'm not gonna lie, launch has gone pretty poorly so far. Hopefully that'll improve, but whatever. I'm mostly just glad to get on to something new instead of couch combat. Despite that, I know I still have work to do on couch combat, and so I'm looking for feedback. If you bought and played the game, please critique the game or give suggestions if you have any. You can do it wherever. I read all the comments on my videos, and I generally try to respond to most people on Discord. And of course, you could always review it on Steam if you feel inclined to. And if you don't plan on getting the game, then I'd be interested to hear why. I don't mind that you don't want to buy it, it's not a big deal. But it'll be interesting to hear what people want in a game like this. I'm working on a big bug fix and quality of life patch, and I'm not sure when it'll be done. But after that, I'll probably add some content to the game, and just try to tie it together and correct any mistakes that I can. Thanks for following and supporting me for these 2 years, and I'm very excited to move on to new projects in the future. Thank you to my patrons who are very cool. Bye. I released my game Couch Combat just over a month ago on Steam, and I've been making devlogs over the entire period of the game's development, which was over 2 years long. So I had around 2,000 wishlist at launch. So how did the game do? Well, that's complicated. Finances are complicated. I don't make nearly all the money from every sale. Right away, Steam takes a 30% cut in exchange for letting me put their game on their marketplace and also providing marketing for my game. Other than that, people can also refund my game, and also taxes are taken from that total amount, cutting down the percentage of money that I actually make to around 50 to 60% of gross sales. The most important day when it comes to launching a game is launch day, and that was the most obvious and second least useful sentence in this video, only beaten in uselessness by this sentence. Day 1 had 21 sales, which was honestly pretty bad. I suppose I just expected to get more wishlist conversions first day. I had over 2,000 wishlists and been hyping up the game quite a bit on my YouTube, but despite the rocky start, things began to slowly become less rocky. This was due in part to me publishing a video just a few days after launch talking about that last week of development, a video which just happened to do quite well. But by the end of the first week, I had actually sold 90 units and made around $746. But this wasn't the exact amount I was actually going to take away when all was said and done, because I still had to account for refunds and taxes. But now, a bit over a month later, I've gotten 256 sales, which makes $2,560 before Steam's cut, which then turns into $2,106 gross profit, and a final net profit of around $1,585. Now $1,600 is a bit of money, but it's really not that much for around 2 years of work. Now I haven't exactly spent those entire 2 years grinding on the game full time. I had to learn Unity in the beginning, I had schools and sports and made a ton of jam games, and I've had this YouTube channel to manage, and sometimes it's just been ridiculously unproductive. Oh yeah, and that's not my final profit, because I actually spent a decent amount of money on the production of this game. So let's go through the fun process of cutting down my profits just a bit more, shall we? There were really only 3 expenses. First off, I commissioned music for the game, second, I commissioned an artist to create cover art, and finally, I bought a couple of assets to assist in the creation of the game. And adding all these expenses together comes to an estimated total of around $1,300 total. I think I got a very good deal, and I'm happy with the work that both commissioners did for the game. But that unfortunately brings my profit to around $285, which is pretty pitiful. Now that I'm going over my analytics for this video, it really does look like Couch Combat was a terrible failure, but that's not really how I feel about the game, to be honest. Thinking about it now, I'm ready to be over with this, but I think I learned a lot and got a decent amount out of it. Although I would have loved for the process to be much easier. It would have been so nice if my devlogs had just done better, and I wouldn't have ever had to consider marketing my game at all. Or even if I just had a somewhat okay wishlist conversion rate closer to the average of 10% instead of my abysmal 2%. But I'm not exactly hurting for money right now. I made quite a bit more money off my channel than my game and off of sponsors. And I'm still in high school, so I don't really have to worry about making money yet. But I still have some hope for Couch Combat to make a bit of money. One last try, as I've actually increased by over 1,000 wishlists since I've launched the game. So I have 3,000 people, which is a somewhat big untapped group of people who are interested in my game. My goal is to create a sort of perfect storm to convert as many people as possible, which might also help Steam to push the game a bit more. I have no idea if this will actually do well, but here are the 3 main points that I'll execute all at once. And the first one is the easiest. I'm going to press a couple of buttons. I'll put the game on a decent sized sale, and I'll also use one of my visibility rounds on Steam. And my reason for using this visibility round is because part 2 is that I will be releasing a big update, and the main focus for this update is the one prevailing request and complaint I've gotten while making this game. But I'm gonna try, for the 3rd time, to do online multiplayer. I've been taking it slow this time, and I think it's possible to add it into the game, but it will probably take a lot more time. If I can't get it to work, then I'll probably just give up on Couch Combat and move on. But I made some progress, so let's hope that I actually get it done. And the 3rd part of this final push for Couch Combat is just to try to release a successful video whenever I drop this update in sale. Of course, it's impossible to make sure that video is successful, but I'll try, and maybe it'll bring a few more people to the game and help Steam to push it just a bit more. Overall, I'm happy with how the game turned out, and I want to try to improve it in the future and try to improve the sales, but it's not a huge deal if it doesn't do well. It is mostly I just want to move on to my next project. But yeah, those are my metrics and future plans for Couch Combat.
So, fast forward almost a year and we're back at the present. Couch Combat has been on Steam for a while now, and it has slowly racked up sales, right around 500 total sales. And personally, I'm very happy with that. Looking back, Couch Combat is far from a perfect game, and I encountered a ton of issues during its development. However, in the end, I think it is fairly unique and fun to play with friends, so I'm happy with how it turned out. And my new game, Project Seaborn, has actually had a much smoother development so far. But I think that's largely because I have learned from the mistakes I made during the development of Couch Combat, so I really do think I learned a lot while making that game. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to get Couch Combat, it is currently on sale for 40% off on Steam, and you can play on PC, Mac, or Linux. And if you want to watch another long-form development video, then you can also watch my recent 100 Days of Game Development video for my new action RPG, Project Seaborn. Okay, bye.